Chapter 1. Marineford, the glorious island of the marine, is now turning into a tragic hell on earth. The roar of artillery fire tears the air, the clash of swords is crisp and deadly, and blood is like ink, staining the white ice and the grey square red. The most elite soldiers of the naval headquarters and the brave men of the Whitebeard pirates are fighting a desperate battle that will determine the direction of the times. Every minute and every second, lives are dying, and roars and cries are intertwined. Whitebeard, Edward Newgate, the man known as the strongest man in the world, looked a little embarrassed at the moment. His burly body was covered with hideous wounds, knife wounds, gunshot wounds, and even burnt black by the magma of Marine Admiral Akainu. Blood kept flowing down his knotted muscles, gathering into a glaring pool of blood at his feet. But he still stood like an unshakable mountain, and the huge Naginata Kurokumokiri in his hand, every time he swung it, it carried the power to split mountains and rocks. His eyes were bloodshot as he stared at the towering execution platform in the distance. His son, Ace the Fire Fist, was locked there, waiting for death. In order to rescue Ace, he used all the power of the pirates and was willing to make the whole world his enemy. However, the brutality of the battle was far beyond his expectations. The Marines' defense was like a solid wall, and the captains under his command fought bloody battles one by one, but it was still difficult to break through. Gulala! Whitebeard let out a low roar from his throat. It was more like an outburst of anger and grief that was suppressed to the ultimate than a laugh. He saw Marco being handcuffed by Marine Vice Admiral Ghost Spider, falling from the sky, and being pierced through the body by Kizura's laser. He saw Diamond Jaws, who was distracted by worrying about him, and his entire right arm was frozen by Aokiji, and half of his body was covered with ice. He saw Ounce Jr., in order to open up a path, his huge body endured the ruthless concentrated fire of the marine, and finally fell down with a bang, splashing ice chips all over the sky. Familiar faces, children he treated as his own, were constantly being injured and even dying before his eyes. The Marines' offensive was as continuous as the tide, Marshal Sengoku's strategy was ruthless and precise, and the strength of the three admirals was an insurmountable barrier. The grief and anger in Whitebeard's heart was like a volcano about to erupt, accumulating and surging. He knew that if this continued, not only would Ace be saved, but the entire Whitebeard pirates would probably be buried here. Dead! The remaining captains and crew members shouted heartbreakingly. They tried to rush to Whitebeard to share the pressure with him, but they were entangled by the Marine soldiers. Whitebeard took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling violently. He felt the remaining strength in his body, felt his vitality slipping away like sand in an hourglass. He knew that he didn't have much time left. A remnant of the old era, there is no ship that can carry me in the new era. However, he couldn't fall down like this, he still had one last thing to do. He slowly raised the Kuroganakiri in his hand, with the tip of the blade pointed diagonally at the sky. An indescribable aura of terror emanated from him, as if the air had frozen. The noisy shouts and cries of killing on the battlefield seemed to have stopped at this moment. Everyone's eyes were involuntarily attracted to this legendary pirates. Ace. Whitebeard whispered the name, his voice full of endless tenderness and regret. Children. His eyes swept over the crew members who were still fighting bloody battles, and a trace of determination flashed in his eyes. He concentrated all his sorrow, anger, unwillingness, and love into the next blow. The muscles in his arms bulged, and the veins bulged like dragons. The powerful shock fruit ability was activated to the ultimate. A white halo enveloped his fists and Naginata. The halo was so dazzling, but it also exuded a heart-pounding aura of destruction. However, his target was not any marine in front of him, nor was it Sengoku or Akainu on the high platform in the distance. His Naginata suddenly turned around and slashed fiercely at the ground below. His fist, which had gathered all his life's strength, also bombarded the solid ice and the ancient bedrock of Marineford. Boom boom boom. There was a loud noise that could not be described in words, like thunder from the sky exploding in my ears. The entire Marineford Island, no, the entire sea area, was shaking violently at this moment. The earth was wailing under the weight of the heavy load, as if an angry ancient beast was roaring. The hard ice, under Whitebeard's devastating blow, shattered like fragile glass. The cracks spread wildly in all directions from where he landed, quickly covering the entire square like a spider web. Then, the bedrock of Marineford Island under the ice also began to make teeth-grinding cracking sounds. What's going on? A marine soldier was horrified to find that the ground beneath his feet was shaking violently and he could not stand steadily. Earthquake? No. This is much scarier than an earthquake. Another pirates was experienced, but had never seen such a horrific sight. The cracks grew larger and deeper, and bottomless darkness shone through them. Then, a despairing scene occurred. The cold sea water rushed in from those huge cracks with unprecedented ferocity. At first it was just a trickle, but soon it turned into a raging torrent, and then a roaring torrent. The sea water was like a beast that had been imprisoned for 1,000 years. Once it broke free, it would devour everything. Sea water. The sea water is coming up. Run! The order on the battlefield collapsed instantly. Both the Marines and the pirates seemed so small and powerless in the face of such a natural disaster. And this is just the beginning. As the bedrock of Marineford continued to break, the backflow of seawater became more and more rapid. In the center of Whitebeard's attack, the seawater even formed a huge uzumaki. Then, in front of everyone's horrified eyes, the sea level surrounding the entire Marineford island began to drop at a speed visible to the naked eye. No, it's not that the sea level is dropping, but the islands shattered by Whitebeard are being impacted and lifted by the sea water from below. Then, an even more terrifying scene appeared. The sea level in the distance began to rise abnormally, forming huge water walls that blocked out the sky and the sun. Tsunami. Whitebeard used his own life as a sacrifice to shatter the entire Marineford, creating an unprecedented tsunami. This tsunami did not come from far away, but erupted from the center of the battlefield, from under everyone's feet, and then swept in all directions. Chapter 2. Those could no longer be called ocean waves, they were moving ocean mountains. Each wave was hundreds of meters high, carrying tremendous force, making a deafening roar, as if it was going to smash the sky to pieces and drag everything in the world into the abyss. Whitebeard stood on the land that was about to be torn apart, letting the wind blow his blood-stained robes, his body still standing tall. He looked at the terrified Marines and the equally shocked pirates, with a sad but resolute smile on his face. This was his last act of rage, and also his last resort to clear a way out for the children. He wanted to use this huge wave to completely disrupt the entire battlefield and the Marines' deployment, in order to gain a slim chance of survival for Ace's survival and the children's retreat. The raging waves, with unprecedented force, mercilessly swept towards the center of the chaotic battlefield, vowing to completely devour and cleanse this land filled with killing and sin, along with all life on it. The power of Whitebeard's earth-shattering attack was far beyond the imagination of everyone present. It was not just a simple release of power, but the ultimate use of the shock fruit ability, which penetrated the foundation of Marineford Island deeply. The earth's violent wailing continued, and the vibrations underfoot were like death-threatening drumbeats, beating on everyone's heart. Marineford Square, a place that once symbolized the highest glory and justice of the Marine, was completely torn apart by the terrifying force that came from the depths of the earth in just a few seconds. The originally solid and complete square was now like a cookie crushed by a giant's hand, splitting into dozens of floating islands of varying sizes. These floating islands shook and collided violently in the surging seawater, making a tooth-grinding friction sound. Countless Marines and pirates had no time to react and fell into the icy and turbid current as the ground beneath their feet collapsed. Help! Catch me! Catch me! Shrill screams and desperate cries for help came one after another, but were soon drowned out by even louder roars. The seawater rushed into the torn gap frantically, sweeping up large amounts of mud, gravel, and countless weapons and shipwrecks destroyed in the battle, forming a series of turbid and deadly undercurrents. The iconic and magnificent building of the naval headquarters, which symbolized absolute justice, also groaned under the heavy load. Spiderweb-like cracks appeared on the walls of the building and expanded rapidly. Window glass shattered like raindrops and fell one after another. Then, with a heart-shattering roar, the naval headquarters building broke in the middle, as if it had been cut in half. The upper half of the huge building lost its support and fell with an unparalleled momentum towards the square below, which had already turned into an ocean. Boom! Smoke and mist rose into the sky, forming a huge mushroom cloud that obscured the sky. The unimaginable impact force caused the surrounding floating islands to shake more violently, and even several smaller floating islands were directly shattered or pressed underwater by the collapsed building debris. Countless Marine officers and soldiers who were originally commanding, fighting or responsible for logistics in the building did not even have time to scream before they were buried or swept into the flood as the building collapsed, and their lives or deaths were unknown. The original order of the battlefield completely collapsed at this moment. The encirclement carefully arranged by the Marines and the front lines that the pirates fought hard to attack were all destroyed in the face of this natural disaster. Looking around, there were only broken walls, turbulent waves, and figures struggling to float in the water. The three admirals of the marine could no longer maintain their original composure at this moment. Akainu Sakazuki, the iron-blooded admiral who believed in complete justice, looked so gloomy that water seemed to drip out of his face. The ground beneath his feet had already broken apart, and part of the lava he created with great eruption was quickly cooled and extinguished by the surging sea water, making a hissing sound and emitting bursts of white smoke. The other part sank into the water with the broken land masses, or was thrown into the air by the huge waves. He tried to use the torrent of lava to block the invasion of seawater, and even wanted to evaporate the seawater with high temperature, but in the face of this overwhelming amount of water, his efforts seemed to be a drop in the bucket. The rolling lava and the surging seawater collided with each other, erupting more violent steam and chaotic energy fluctuations. He had to use more energy to stabilize his body and avoid the huge wreckage swept up by the tsunami. He roared angrily, and the magma fists kept blasting out, trying to open up a stable foothold, but everything around him was falling apart. Aokiji Kyuzan, who always appeared lazy, now had a serious look on his face. He immediately activated his Ice Age ability, trying to freeze the surrounding seawater to slow down the collapse of Marineford and create more footholds for the marine soldiers. Huge blocks of ice spread out under his feet, colliding with the surging waves, making a crackling sound of freezing and the sound of ice breaking. His ability did slow down the advance of the seawater to a certain extent, giving some people a precious respite. However, the scale of the disaster caused by Whitebeard was too large, and the speed of his freezing was far behind the speed of the collapse of the entire island and the backflow of seawater. The ice surface he created was soon torn and washed away by deeper vibrations and stronger currents. He had to continue to output his ability, and fine beads of sweat oozed out of his forehead. Obviously, this was also a huge consumption for him. Kizaru Borsellino, with the light-speed movement ability of the sparkling fruit, nimbly dodged between the constantly collapsing buildings and the flying debris. His figure turned into golden rays of light, appearing and disappearing on the chaotic battlefield. Every time he appeared, he would appear on a relatively safe floating island, or use a beam of light to bring some marine soldiers who were about to fall into the sea to a safe area. Even he, the iconic lewd smile on his face disappeared at this moment, replaced by an incredible astonishment. He kept looking around, watching the once impregnable marine fortress turned into a swamp in a few minutes, watching countless marine colleagues struggling in the disaster. This natural disaster scene, even for him who was used to seeing big storms and waves, was deeply shocked. He understood that at this moment, personal bravery had become very limited in the face of such a large-scale destruction. The most realistic option was to prioritize self-protection and rescue his subordinates as much as possible. Chapter 3. On the execution platform, Marine Marshal Sengoku and Hero Garp looked at everything happening below with grim faces. The execution platform was located in a relatively high area and had not yet been completely submerged by the sea, but it was already shaky. This guy Nugate actually did this. Sengoku gritted his teeth, his voice full of anger and a hint of barely perceptible fear. He could never have imagined that Whitebeard would destroy the entire Marineford in such a way that would destroy both the good and the bad. Garp remained silent, only clenching his fists tightly, his knuckles turning white from the force. His eyes were complicated as he looked at the huge figure in the distance that still stood firm in the wind and waves, Whitebeard. As an old rival, he knew Whitebeard's fear better than anyone else, but the scene before him was still beyond his cognition. Chaos, utter chaos. The marine formation was broken up, and the pirates' offensive lost its target. Everyone was struggling to survive in the face of this sudden catastrophe. Roars, explosions, collapsed buildings, and roaring waves intertwined into a doomsday symphony that echoed over the former naval headquarters. Whitebeard's attack was like a huge rock thrown into a calm lake, causing a huge wave and completely changing the course of the war. Marineford, the unsinkable sea fortress, was sliding into the abyss in an irreversible manner. Just as Marineford was torn apart by Whitebeard's thundering blow, countless lives were struggling to survive between the surging tsunami and the collapsing land masses. When people thought this was the end of the world, a stranger and deeper movement quietly came from under the cracked seabed. This throbbing was different from the violent shaking and tearing caused by the Whitebeard shock fruit. It was more stable and penetrating, as if it did not come from the surface of the Earth's crust, but from the deeper seabed, or even the core of the Earth. It was a low hum, like some ancient beast that had been sleeping for tens of thousands of years, slowly waking up and taking its first breath in this world. The aftermath of the tsunami is still raging, but people's attention is involuntarily drawn to this new and more mysterious vibration. In the center of the original Marineford site, where Whitebeard's attack had caused the most severe shattering of the island's bedrock, the surging water suddenly stopped its chaotic tumbling and began to swirl in a strange way. At first, the speed of rotation was relatively slow, but soon, the scope became larger and larger, and the speed became faster and faster. An extremely huge Uzumaki quietly formed between the broken floating islands and the turbulent waves. This Uzumaki was bottomless, as if it was directly connected to the entrance of hell, emitting a heart-pounding suction force, ruthlessly sucking the surrounding rubble, debris, and even some unfortunate people who fell into the water into it. What is that? A marine soldier who managed to climb onto a floating wooden board pointed at the huge Uzumaki in the distance with a trembling voice. Is an underwater volcano about to erupt? Another pirate's face turned pale. He would rather face the marines' swords and guns than face this irresistible natural force. However, what happened next made everyone's guess come to nothing and brought their fear to a new peak. As the throbbing from the depths of the sea became stronger and stronger, the sea water in the center of the huge Uzumaki began to surge and bulge violently, as if some huge monster was about to break out of the water. The mud on the seabed was stirred and rolled endlessly, dyeing the sea area an even deeper black color. Boom! A loud noise like muffled thunder came from the bottom of the sea, and then, under the gaze of countless horrified, confused, and terrified eyes, an unimaginably huge building complex actually broke through the thick seabed mud, pushed away the surging sea water, and slowly rose from the bottom of the sea. It was a magnificent palace that was glowing with a faint lavender light. It is made of neither gold nor stone, neither wood nor jade, and exudes a cold and strange metallic luster, yet has a soft texture like some organic matter. The sunlight shines through the turbid sea water and diffuse mist, shining on the surface of the palace, refracting a dreamy halo. The overall style of the palace is completely different from any civilization known in the world, whether it is the Coral Palace of the Fishmen Island, the Golden Town of Sky Island, or the traditional architecture of Wano Kuni. It has no sharp straight lines, but is full of smooth and rounded curves, as if it is a perfect combination of the skeleton of some giant marine creature and modern technology. The huge tower is not straight up, but bends in an elegant arc, pointing to the sky. The corridors connecting the various parts also extend naturally like the veins of a living thing. What makes people feel even more mysterious and uneasy is that on the surface of this lavender palace, there are countless mysterious golden words twisted like tadpoles. These words flicker with a faint light, as if they have life, flowing slowly on the surface of the palace. No one knows these words, and no one can understand what they represent, but just looking at them makes people feel inexplicably dizzy and palpitating, as if their souls are being sucked into them. The palace was not rising fast, but every inch it rose brought a stronger visual impact and spiritual shock to the people around it. The sea water slid down from its huge surface, forming spectacular waterfalls, making a splashing sound. The silt and sediment on the seabed peeled off like old clothes, revealing a clearer and more awe-inspiring palace. Those who were just terrified by the tsunami and island collapse almost forgot the danger they were in. Their eyes were completely attracted by this incredible creation that emerged from the bottom of the sea. What is this? Akainu managed to steady himself, looking at the huge palace that was rising up, his eyes full of vigilance and confusion. Even he had never seen such a strange sight. Aokiji stopped making ice cubes and stared at the palace with a frown. He could feel that the breath emanating from the palace was neither demon fruit power nor haki, but a more ancient and unfathomable power. Kizaru also stopped flashing. He was suspended in the air, squinting his eyes, trying to see the details of the palace. Oh my, it's getting more and more interesting. This is really a surprise beyond my expectations. There was a hint of his usual teasing in his tone, but his eyes were filled with unprecedented solemnity. Chapter 4. Whitebeard also noticed this sudden change. He panted and looked at the slowly rising palace, frowning. He had been on the sea for decades and was well informed, but he had never heard of such a large-scale mysterious building hidden under the sea. Gulala. It seems that this sea is still hiding secrets that we don't know about. His voice was a little hoarse, but still full of haki. The mysterious lavender palace, like a visitor from another world, brought with it endless mysteries and an unsettling atmosphere. It slowly but inexorably rose toward the sea above the ruins of the destroyed Marineford. The huge palace, shining with a faint purple light, continued to rise up under the deep throbbing of the seabed and the attention of the crowd. It broke through the layers of seawater and pushed away the rolling mud, like a giant beast that had broken free from its ancient shackles and was finally about to see the light of day again. When its huge base was completely separated from the seabed and the main part of the entire palace complex gradually emerged in the air, everyone was shocked by its unimaginable grand scale and couldn't help but gasp. The palace rose higher and higher, and finally, above the sea where the aftermath of the tsunami gradually subsided, it slowly hovered. Yes, hovering. It did not float on the water like an ordinary island, but in a way that violated common sense of physics, it quietly suspended in the air dozens of meters above the sea surface, as if there was an invisible force holding it up from below. Its scale was so huge that when it was fully displayed in front of everyone, it almost covered half of the sky. The sky, which had become somewhat dim due to the tsunami, seemed even more oppressive under the huge shadow of it. The sunlight passed through the cracks and edges of the palace with difficulty, shining on its strange, lavender metal material that seemed to breathe, reflecting a dazzling and strange halo. The golden tadpole characters flowing on the surface appeared clearer and more mysterious in the sun. Everyone present, whether they were exhausted and wounded marines or pirates who were also fighting and trying to break through, all forgot about the fight and the danger around them. They all raised their heads, opened their mouths, and stared blankly at the huge creation that suddenly appeared and hovered in the air in such an incredible way. The fear and confusion caused by the tsunami caused by Whitebeard and the collapse of Marineford seemed to be replaced by a more primitive and profound awe and confusion. Everything that happened before their eyes was completely beyond their cognition and beyond their understanding of the world. "What on earth is that?" a young marine muttered to himself, his voice filled with undisguised trembling. The spear in his hand drooped weakly, and he even forgot that there was a pirate staring at him not far away. The pirate's was not much better, he also looked up, the fierce expression on his face had been replaced by astonishment. A monster? Or, some kind of ancient weapon? He racked his brains, but could not connect the scene in front of him with any of his past experiences. On the execution platform, Marshal Sengoku's face became more solemn than ever. He held his forehead, as if he was thinking hard. Impossible. There is no record of such a thing in the world government's records. Where did it come from? His voice was low and hoarse, full of confusion and anxiety. Garp stood beside him, his usual cheerful and uninhibited smile disappeared, replaced by a rare seriousness. He stared at the floating palace, feeling the faint aura emanating from it. This thing is very old, and very powerful. His intuition told him that this palace was definitely not a good one. The remaining members of the Whitebeard pirates were also stunned by this sudden turn of events. "Dad, what the hell is that?" Phoenix Marco barely supported his injured body and flew to Whitebeard, his voice full of vigilance. He could feel the aura emanating from the palace, which made him feel uneasy instinctively. "Gulala, who knows?" Whitebeard grinned. Although he was weak, his eyes were still as sharp as an eagle. "It seems that our troubles today are not limited to those marine brats." The palace suspended in the air was silent. It made no sound, nor did it show any obvious hostility or kindness. But it was this silence that added to its sense of mystery and oppression. An indescribable ancient and powerful aura spread from the palace, spreading like an invisible ripple to the entire Marineford wreckage area. This aura is not the direct deterrence of Conqueror's haki, nor is it the concrete power of Devil Fruit ability, but a more original and pure energy fluctuation. It seems to have experienced the precipitation of billions of thousands of years, witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations, and has a kind of indifference and majesty that overlooks all living things. Under the influence of this aura, many weaker marines and pirates even had difficulty breathing and their heartbeats accelerated, as if an invisible mountain was pressing down on their hearts. Even those experienced warriors, such as the Marine Admiral and the captains of the Whitebeard pirates, felt an inexplicable palpitation. Is this the abode of gods? The majesty it exudes is beyond the ordinary, making people involuntarily want to worship it. Or is it a demon's lair? Its strange shape, mysterious words, and disturbing ancient atmosphere remind people of certain taboo legends and terrifying existences in the abyss. No one knows where it came from, and no one knows why it appears at this moment, and why it is presented to the world in this way. It is like a huge question mark, hanging in everyone's mind. Is it a blessing or a curse? The unknown is often the most frightening. At this moment, the shouting and killing on the battlefield has completely subsided, leaving only the sound of waves hitting the floating ice and wreckage, and the heavy breathing of people. Everyone's eyes are focused on the mysterious palace, waiting, guessing, and fearing its next move. Time seems to have frozen at this moment, and the air is filled with suffocating tension and anxiety. This foreign palace rising from the bottom of the sea has added a more confusing and dangerous shadow to this already tragic summit war. Chapter 5. Just as the entire Marineford battlefield fell into silence because of this mysterious palace that fell from the sky, actually rose from the bottom of the sea, and everyone was shocked by its ancient and powerful aura, with their hearts filled with unknown and fear, the Lavender Palace suspended in the air finally made a new move. In the center of the palace complex, the top of the tallest and most peculiar tower-like building, whose originally smooth surface suddenly began to change. Countless tiny metal components slowly retreated, folded, and reorganized like petals, revealing a huge, deep circular structure inside. This circular structure was several hundred meters in diameter, and its entire body was a darker purple than the palace itself, like the pupil of a gigantic eyeball. It stared quietly at the chaotic and messy battlefield below, without any light or sound, but with a chilling coldness and indifference. What is that? A Marine Rear Admiral swallowed hard, his voice a little distorted due to nervousness. He felt like he was being stared at by a prehistoric beast from another dimension, and the hairs on his body stood up involuntarily. Not only him, but almost everyone who noticed the circular structure had an ominous premonition in their hearts. It felt like a prey being locked by a top predator, with nowhere to escape and nowhere to hide. The next moment, as everyone watched in fear, the huge circular structure suddenly lit up without any warning. It was not a blinding light, but a dark light as deep as a black hole that could swallow all light. As the light flowed, it seemed as if countless stars were born and died in it, and it seemed to be connected to an unknown dimension. Then, an invisible but despairingly powerful suction force suddenly burst out from the lit one eye like a flood breaking through a dam. This suction force was not aimed at a specific target, but covered the entire Marineford wreckage area, whether it was the huge floating islands floating on the sea, the people struggling in the water, or the ship wreckage and weapons and equipment scattered everywhere, all were within the range of this suction force. The first to be affected were the lighter objects and the weaker people. They only felt an irresistible force acting on them, and their bodies involuntarily flew towards the one-eyed palace in the air. What's happening? My body is out of control. A pirate screamed in horror. He waved his arms desperately, trying to grab the floating wooden board beside him, but the suction was too strong. He was like being grabbed by an invisible giant hand and quickly pulled into the air. Hold on! Hold on, everyone! The marine officers shouted loudly, trying to maintain order, but they themselves were also staggering in the face of the sudden suction and had no time to care about anything else. Solid ice, huge rocks, broken masts, everything began to break away from the sea, twisting and deforming, pulled by the horrible suction force, converging towards the one eye of the palace, forming a huge torrent of all kinds of debris. The marine admirals were not spared either. Akainu Sakazuki roared, stomping his feet on the floating island below, trying to resist the suction with his powerful strength. His whole body turned into boiling lava, emitting amazing heat, trying to stabilize his body with his weight and strength. However, the suction was so strange and powerful that even he could feel his body floating up little by little. Lava kept dripping from his body, but was swept up by the suction and pulled into the air. He swung his fist angrily, and the giant lava fist slammed into the palace, but his attack was twisted and disintegrated by the invisible suction before it approached the palace. Ice Age. Aokiji Kyuzen activated his ability again, trying to freeze himself and the marines around him in a huge block of ice to increase weight and stability to resist suction. However, just as the iceberg he created took shape, it was uprooted by an even more powerful force, carrying him and the frozen marines around him towards the palace. For the first time, he showed a look of shock on his face. The nature of this power was completely beyond his understanding. Kizaru Borsellino tried to transform into light to evade. However, when he turned into a golden light and tried to escape from the area, he was shocked to find that even light could not completely escape the influence of the suction. His speed was obviously slowed down, and his body seemed to be trapped in some kind of sticky quagmire. He was forcibly pulled by an invisible force, changing the trajectory of his flight and involuntarily heading towards the one eye of the palace. Oh my, this is really troublesome. For the first time, his signature drawn-out tone was filled with real panic. The Shishibukai also tried to resist by showing their skills. Sandstorm. Crocodile turned into a sky full of yellow sand, trying to disperse his body to weaken the effect of suction, but the sand was like iron filings attracted by a magnet, gathering into a stream of sand and flying towards the palace. Hawkeye My Hawk wielded the black knife, slashing out sharp sword energy, trying to cut through the invisible suction force, but the sword energy disappeared without a trace after flying a short distance, and he himself was pulled into the air by a powerful force. He held the black knife tightly, his eyes sharp, but he could not stop his body from moving. Even Ace, who was far away on the execution platform, was not spared. The suction ignored the restraints of sea stone and acted directly on his body. He felt a powerful force pulling him up from the execution platform, and the chains made a creaking sound under the heavy load, and then suddenly broke. He flew towards the palace like a kite with a broken string. He subconsciously looked down and saw Whitebeard, who was also pulled by the suction and flew towards the palace involuntarily. "Dad!" Ace cried out, his eyes filled with despair and unwillingness. He would rather be executed than see his father and companions encounter such unknown dangers. Whitebeard also felt the irresistible suction. He was already severely injured and exhausted, and it was even more difficult to resist at this moment. He roared and tried to fight back with the power of the shock fruit, but the force was like a maggot on the tarsal bone, tightly sucking him and pulling his huge body off the ground little by little. His feet plowed 2 deep grooves on the broken floating island, but in the end he was unable to resist and was slowly pulled into the air. Chapter 6. Gulala. What is this? A mandatory invitation. Whitebeard grinned, with a hint of helplessness and a hint of heroism in his smile. He looked at his sons who were also sucked into the palace, as well as the terrified marines, with mixed feelings in his heart. Whether it was the Marine Admiral, the Shishibukai, or the crew of the 4 Emperors, whether it was a hero, a criminal, or an ordinary soldier, they all seemed so small and powerless in front of this powerful and desperate suction from the mysterious palace. Their struggles and resistances were all futile, like a mantis trying to stop a chariot. Everyone was bound by an invisible force, and their bodies were uncontrollably pulled towards the huge one eye on the surface of the floating palace. No one knew what was waiting for them, life or death, blessing or disaster. But they had no choice but to watch themselves getting closer and closer to the terrifying one eye emitting dark light, as if they were about to be dragged into an unknown, unfathomable abyss. On the wreckage of Marineford, a collective ascension spectacle beyond everyone's imagination took place. Desperate cries, angry roars, and terrified screams intertwined, but were soon drowned out by the huge sound of wind brought by the invisible suction force. An era seemed to be forcibly pulled into a new, unknown chapter in a way that no one could have predicted. Once the terrifying suction force from the mysterious palace one eye erupted, it was irresistible. Whether it was the elite marines, the brave men of the Whitebeard pirates, or the Shishibukai who played an important role in the Summit War, at this moment, they were like fallen leaves in the wind, being involuntarily swept into the unknown abyss. The process of being sucked into the palace was not a simple straight-line pull as everyone had initially imagined. When the body touched the edge of the dark light emitted by the one eye, a strong sense of dizziness suddenly hit. The scene in front of the eyes was instantly distorted and shattered, and then turned into a torrent of bizarre colors. It was as if I was thrown into a huge, constantly rotating manjiki. Red, blue, green, yellow, all kinds of indescribable colors rolled, intertwined, and collided before my eyes like boiling paint, forming a dazzling array of uzumaki and stripes. My body seemed to have lost all its weight, floating lightly, rolling and drifting uncontrollably in this colorful passage. Why? What the hell is this place? Help! I'm going to vomit! Screams, roars, and retching sounds due to violent rolling echoed in the passage. But these sounds were soon drowned out by a more bizarre and pervasive humming sound. It was a low and continuous buzzing sound, as if countless huge bees were flapping their wings in the ears, or as if some kind of extremely precise machine was running at high speed. This humming sound was extremely penetrating and directly acted on the human brain, making the already confused senses even worse. Luffy felt dizzy and his stomach churned. He subconsciously stretched out his rubber arm, trying to grab something to steady himself. At the moment he was sucked in, he and Ace were being pulled by the remains of the execution platform. At this moment, he still held on to the thick stake tightly, and his other hand was tightly holding Ace's arm. "Ace! Hold on to me!" Luffy shouted, even though he himself was like in a giant washing machine, unable to tell up from down, left from right. The wooden stake that once symbolized despair and death was now the only straw he could hold on to. However, the stake was not spared, and was swept into the twisted passage, taking the two of them, as well as some broken chains wrapped around it, with it, rolling together. Ace's condition was not much better than Luffy's. Although the sea stone restraints were broken by the suction, the long-term torture and weakness left him almost without strength. He could feel Luffy holding his hand tightly, and the strength was so firm that it calmed his confused mind a little. He tried to open his eyes and see the surrounding situation clearly, but all he saw was a disgusting chaos. He clenched his teeth and endured the discomfort brought by the weightlessness of his body and the impact of the ubiquitous buzzing sound on his mind. The Marine Admirals also lost their former composure in this unknown passage. Akainu Sakazuki, even if the element was transformed into lava, could not find a stable form in this twisted space. He felt his lava body being pulled and twisted by an invisible force, as if it was about to be torn into countless pieces. He roared angrily and tried to stabilize himself with armament haki, but to little effect. This feeling of being completely out of control made him, an admiral who believed in absolute power, feel extremely frustrated and angry. Aokiji Kyuzan gave up resistance and let his body roll as the passage twisted. He squinted his eyes, as if trying to adapt to this strange environment, or thinking about the nature of this passage. There was not much expression on his face, but his furrowed brows showed his inner restlessness. He could feel that this passage was filled with a strange energy that he had never come into contact with. This energy seemed to interfere with his devil fruit ability, making it difficult for him to use the power of freezing effectively. Kizaru Borsellino was in the worst situation. He tried to transform into a light particle and shuttle through, but the moment he entered the channel, he found that his speed was greatly limited. Light, it seems, cannot travel in a straight line here, but is forced to bend with the distortion of space. The wretched smile that he always had on his face had long disappeared, replaced by a rare solemnity and a trace of panic. He kept trying, but he could not get rid of the shackles of this channel. He could only be like everyone else, helpless in the torrent of colors. Whitebeard Edward Newgate, the strongest man in the world, also felt a long-lost sense of powerlessness in this unknown passage. His huge body was squeezed and pulled by the twisted space, and the wounds on his body burst again due to the violent rolling. The blood turned into blood beads in the weightlessness, floating in the chaotic colors. He clenched his teeth and tried to stay awake. His sharp eyes tried to penetrate the blurred light and shadow and see the road ahead clearly. He could feel that he was being taken to a completely unknown place, a place that might be more dangerous than Marineford. Dad! Marco transformed into a phoenix, with blue flames burning on his body, and struggled to maintain a certain balance in the passage, trying to get closer to Whitebeard. But the power in the passage was too chaotic, and every time he flapped his wings, he would be deviated by a sudden twisting force. Chapter 7. Hold steady. Don't panic. Marshal Sengoku's voice rang out in the chaos. He tried to calm everyone with his authority, but his voice was soon swallowed by the strange buzzing sound. He himself was rolling in the passage, the golden Buddha light on him flickered, and he was obviously trying his best to resist this unknown force. Time seemed to have lost its meaning in this twisted passage. No one knew how long they had been drifting, whether it was a moment or a century. The confusion of senses, the weightlessness of the body, and the ubiquitous humming sound made everyone fall into a chaotic state of half-sleep and half-wakefulness. Just when everyone felt that their spirits were about to be worn away by the endless rolling and buzzing, the chaotic colors in front of them suddenly began to fade, and a white light vaguely appeared at the end of the passage. The white light became brighter and clearer, as if it was an exit. Then, the suction force that had been pulling everyone and the irritating buzzing sound suddenly disappeared without any warning. The feeling of weightlessness still existed, but the body was no longer pulled by the twisting force. Everyone seemed to be thrown out of a high-speed rotating machine and fell towards the soft white light. After a short free fall, a solid touch came from under the body. Bang! Bang! Ouch! Various dull impact sounds and painful groans echoed one after another in an extremely vast space. The moment the suction disappeared, everyone fell from the air like dumplings, hitting the mirror smooth, cold and hard metal ground with a series of dull sounds. Luffy was the first to react, even though he was also knocked unconscious and his butt was burning with pain. He immediately checked Ace beside him and found that although Ace was pale, his breathing was still stable. He was just temporarily unconscious because of the violent tumbling and the final fall. He was still holding tightly to the huge wooden stake of the execution platform, which fell with them and hit not far from them, making a loud clang sound. It hurts so much. Luffy rubbed his butt with a grin. The impact resistance of his rubber body allowed him to quickly recover from the impact of the fall. He shook his dizzy head, raised his head curiously, and looked at this unfamiliar environment. This is an extremely large circular hall. The floor of the hall was made of a strange metal that had never been seen before. It was as smooth as a mirror and could clearly reflect everything above. When you stepped on it, it felt cold and hard. Looking up, the dome was so high that the top was almost invisible, as if it was connected to an endless starry sky. The entire dome emitted a soft and even white light, illuminating this huge space like daylight, but without any glare. This light did not come from a single light source, but the entire dome was glowing, like a huge artificial sun. The walls of the hall were also made of an unknown, one-piece strange material. The walls were a deep dark grey, with an extremely smooth surface, without any seams or rivets, as if they were cast from a mold. What was even more striking was that on these dark grey walls, there were countless complex and precise energy lines. These lines were like the blood vessels of living things or the veins of plants, covering the entire wall, and flickering with a light blue light in a regular rhythm, as if the entire hall was breathing. There was a faint, strange smell in the air. It was a smell that was hard to describe, a bit like the ozone left in the air after a thunderstorm, mixed with a faint sweet fragrance, like the fragrance of some unknown flowers. Inhaling this air did not make people feel uncomfortable, but instead made them feel slightly refreshed. What frightened those perceptive warriors even more was that this huge hall was filled with an unknown energy that they had never encountered before. This energy was invisible and intangible, but it was everywhere, filling the entire space like a tide. It was not as intimidating as Haki, nor was it as concrete as the devil fruit ability, but a more fundamental and pure energy fluctuation. Some people could even feel their cells trembling slightly, as if they were resonating with this unknown energy. Where is this place? A marine soldier struggled to get up from the ground. He looked around blankly, his face full of fear and confusion. His marine uniform was tattered, covered with blood and dust, and the spear in his hand had long disappeared. The other marines and pirates also gradually recovered from the dizziness of the fall. Some of them covered the painful parts of their bodies, some helped each other to stand up, and some immediately picked up the weapons that fell around them and looked around vigilantly at the surrounding environment and each other. The atmosphere of hostility that had previously prevailed on the Marineford battlefield seemed at this moment to be replaced by a sense of common confusion and uneasiness. The Marines and the pirates, these two originally antagonistic forces, were now like wild beasts thrown into the same strange cage. Although they still bared their teeth and remained vigilant, no one took action immediately. Marshal Sengoku was one of the first to regain his composure. He stood up with a serious expression, and scanned the entire hall with sharp eyes, trying to find some clues from this strange environment. He immediately tried to release his observation haki, trying to sense the scope of this space and whether there were any potential dangers. However, after his observation haki was released, his brows knitted tightly together. He was horrified to find that in this hall filled with unknown energy, his observation haki was greatly disturbed and suppressed. The perception range that was originally enough to cover most of Marineford was compressed to the limit here. At most, he could barely perceive the movements within 100 meters around him, and the perceived information became blurred, as if separated by a thick layer of fog. This feeling made the battle-hardened Marine Marshal feel a strong sense of uneasiness. The unknown environment, coupled with the greatly weakened perception ability, was undoubtedly an extremely dangerous signal. The energy field here is very strange. Sengoku muttered to himself, his voice full of solemnity. He glanced at Garp not far away and found that Garp was also frowning. Obviously he also noticed something was wrong. Whitebeard Edward Newgate, with the help of several captains, slowly stood up. He coughed violently several times, coughing up a few mouthfuls of saliva with dark red blood clots. His injuries were extremely serious, and after the ordeal just now, he was on the verge of dying. But his sharp eyes still flashed with an unyielding light. He scanned the unfamiliar circular hall vigilantly, feeling the strange energy in the air, and frowned. Chapter 8. Gulala. It seems that we have been taken to an incredible place. Whitebeard's voice was still hoarse, but there was a hint of inexplicable excitement in his tone, or it could be said that it was the pride in facing an unknown challenge. He glanced at the Marines who were also in a state of distress not far away, and a mocking smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. The three admirals Akainu, Aokiji, and Kizaru also got up from the ground, each with a different look on their face. Akainu's face was so gloomy that water could almost drip out of it. He stretched his muscles and bones, feeling the lava power in his body that was a little sluggish due to the fall just now. He looked around, his eyes full of violence and vigilance. He was filled with anger towards this unknown existence that had forcibly abducted them. Aokiji seemed relatively calm. He dusted himself off and looked at the blue lines on the wall for a moment, as if thinking about something. He could feel that the level of technology in this place was far beyond their current understanding. Kizaru whistled, and his face regained a bit of that cynical expression, but his eyes were full of fear. Oh my, this is really a grand scene. I wonder if the owner here will entertain us well. His tone was relaxed, but his fingers curled up slightly unconsciously, ready to transform into an element at any time. The pirates also gathered in twos and threes, looking at the marines around them warily, and at the same time felt overwhelmed by this unfamiliar environment. Captain Marco, Daddy. Diamond Jaws looked at Whitebeard worriedly. Marco shook his head, motioning him to be at ease, and then glanced around sharply. Everyone stay alert, something is wrong here. Let's find out where this place is first. After a brief period of chaos, the hall fell into an eerie silence. Only the heavy breathing of people and the regular flickering of the energy lines on the walls could be heard. Although the marines and pirates still occupied different areas of the hall, a subtle confrontation formed between them, a brief confrontation based on common confusion and the unknown. Everyone realized that they were trapped in a completely unknown place that might not even belong to their world. The scene before them was too strange and full of unimaginable technology, which filled them with uneasiness and awe. For a moment, no one knew what would happen next, and no one dared to act rashly. They could only look at each other warily, while also trying to observe this mysterious and vast alien hall, trying to find a clue from it, a clue that could explain everything in front of them. In this vast hall filled with tension, confusion, and unknown energy, most people remained highly alert, carefully observing their surroundings, not daring to be careless. However, there were always some people who were more cautious, or in other words, those whose curiosity far outweighed their fear. Monkey D. Luffy is a typical example. After recovering from the initial pain of falling, the future Pirates King did not stand guard like the others, nor did he think about any strategic issues. His attention was quickly attracted by this new and huge place. He rolled to his feet, rubbed his still sore butt, and then, like a kid who had just entered an amusement park, he widened his iconic round eyes and looked around curiously. Wow! It's so big! Where is this place? Luffy exclaimed. His voice was particularly loud in this silent and vast hall, attracting the attention of many marines and pirates. He completely ignored those vigilant eyes and jumped on the smooth metal floor of the hall, touching the cold walls and looking up at the dome that was so high that it was invisible and emitted a soft white light. The light blue energy lines flickering on the walls looked like some kind of interesting light show to him. Luffy! Don't run around! Nami, who was not far away, shouted with a headache, but Luffy obviously didn't hear her. Sanji and Zoro also subconsciously moved closer to Luffy to prevent him from causing any trouble. Usopp hid behind Zoro, trembling as he looked at this unknown place, muttering, "I have a disease that prevents me from going to strange places." Luffy's curiosity soon drove him to the edge of the hall, close to the walls covered with complex patterns. He stretched out his rubber finger, poked the cold and smooth wall, and knocked lightly with his fist, making a dull dong-dong sound. "This wall is so strange, it seems to be a whole piece," Luffy said to himself. He felt very novel about this huge one-piece structure. He paced aimlessly while observing the wall. When he passed a corner, perhaps because he was not looking at the road or because of pure luck, his foot accidentally kicked an inconspicuous metal protrusion in the corner. It was a dark grey metal block, only half the size of a fist, protruding slightly from the wall. If you didn't look at it deliberately, or accidentally touched it like Luffy did, no one would notice its existence. Ouch! Luffy tripped and nearly fell. He looked down and found the metal protrusion. What is this? He stretched out his finger curiously and poked the metal protrusion. The metal protrusion seemed to be a button. When Luffy pressed it, it sank silently into the wall. At the moment when the protrusion was pressed, a very slight mechanical transmission sound suddenly came from an area of about 1 foot square on the wall in front of Luffy. Then, the wall surface slid to one side silently like a sliding cover of a precision machine, revealing a small square compartment inside the wall. A plain-looking burlap bag fell out from the slid-open compartment with a pop and landed at Luffy's feet. Oh! Luffy's eyes lit up as if he had found some treasure. He bent down and picked up the bag. The bag felt heavy in the hand, and the rope tied at the mouth was tied in a loose knot. Luffy untied the rope impatiently, opened the bag, and took a look inside. Inside the bag, there were a dozen brightly colored beans the size of full anko. The beans were smooth and shiny, showing an attractive deep red color, with some tiny golden Madara dots, which looked very beautiful. A faint, indescribable strange fragrance emanated from the bag and entered Luffy's nostrils. Chapter 9. Is this food? Luffy's mouth almost watered. For a foodie like him, anything that looked like food was extremely attractive. He picked up a red bean from the bag, put it under his nose and sniffed it carefully. The strange fragrance became stronger, with a hint of sweetness and an indescribable freshness that seemed to be able to revitalize life. It smells good. It should be edible. Luffy came to this simple conclusion immediately. He felt a little hungry now. After all, he had been fighting in Marineford for so long and had just gone through such a tossing and turning, which consumed a lot of energy. He opened his mouth and was about to put the bean with the tempting aroma into his mouth. At this critical moment, a slightly sharp but energetic voice suddenly sounded from the side, stopping his action. "Wait a minute, Straw Hat. What is that? Don't eat it." The speaker was Emporio Ivankov, the SE King. He had just recovered from the dizziness of falling and was observing his surroundings alertly when he noticed what Luffy was doing. Ivankov's eyes were very sharp, or in other words, he had his own unique way of perceiving energy. The moment Luffy took out the red bean, he keenly sensed that the tiny bean seemed to contain an extremely pure and strange energy fluctuation. This energy fluctuation was very restrained, but it gave him an extraordinary feeling. He was startled when he saw Luffy was eager to put it in his mouth, and he quickly spoke out to stop him. Luffy paused, his mouth still open, and looked at Ivankov in confusion. He was holding the red bean in his hand, only a few centimeters away from his mouth. Ivankov walked over quickly, followed by Lightning Inajima. "I say, Straw Hat Boy, we don't even know where this place is. These things come from unknown sources. What if they are poisonous?" Ivankov put his hands on his hips and spoke in his unique tone with a serious expression on his face. He leaned closer to the bean in Luffy's hand, looked at it carefully, and sniffed it. This smell is indeed very special, and Ivankov frowned slightly. He could feel the energy contained in the bean, pure and powerful, but the nature was completely unknown. "But it smells delicious." Luffy pouted in disappointment, looking at the beans in his hand with a face full of desire. For him, the temptation of food is huge, especially this kind of food that makes people salivate with just the smell. Even if it tastes good, you can't eat it carelessly. Ivankov said emphatically, "In this damn place, any negligence could be fatal. Before you figure out what this is, you absolutely can't eat it carelessly." Luffy looked at Ivankov's serious expression, then looked at the beans in his hand. Although he was still very greedy, he nodded reluctantly. Okay. He knew Ivankov was doing this for his own good. Although he was usually careless, he would still listen to his companion's advice at critical moments. He reluctantly put the red bean back into the bag and tied the bag again. But the strange fragrance lingering in the air still made him swallow his saliva, and his stomach also made a gurgling protest. "What kind of beans are these?" Luffy stuffed the bag into his pocket, muttering quietly, with a look of regret on his face. He decided to try them first if he was sure they were edible after figuring out the situation. Ivankov watched Luffy put away the beans, and then he breathed a sigh of relief. He once again looked at the compartment on the wall that slid open silently, and the metal protrusion that Luffy pressed down, his eyes full of thought. This hall is full of weirdness and unknown. Luffy's unintentional action could actually trigger such a mechanism and get such a bag of mysterious beans. Is this a coincidence or some kind of deliberate arrangement? What exactly are these beans? What is the use of the strange energy they contain? A series of questions popped up in Ivankov's mind, and also made some people around who noticed the situation here feel a little curious and wary about the bag of beans in Luffy's pocket. This mysterious alien hall seemed to have just revealed the tip of the iceberg to them. And Luffy's unexpected good luck might just be the beginning. Just when Luffy had a brief exchange with Ivankov over the bag of mysterious beans, attracting the attention of some people around, a sudden change once again brought everyone's minds back to the cruel reality, and also refocused the focus of the summit war on Fire Fist Ace in a tragic way. Akainu Sakazuki, the admiral of headquarters, hates pirates to the bone. He wants to kill the Whitebeard pirates, especially Ace, the bloodline of Pirate King Roger. Previously, due to the appearance of the mysterious palace and the irresistible suction, he was forced to interrupt the execution of Ace. But when everyone was drawn into this strange alien hall, after a brief chaos and confrontation, Akainu keenly caught an opportunity. Most people's attention was attracted by this strange hall environment and Luffy's episode. Whitebeard was seriously injured and was at the end of his strength. Marco and other captains were also exhausted from the previous battle and fall, and were busy on guard and observation. This was a perfect time for a surprise attack. A trace of ruthless killing intent flashed in Akainu's eyes. Without any hesitation, his body suddenly turned into a rolling torrent of lava, and with an astonishing speed, it shot towards the direction of Ace and Luffy with a scorching air wave. Ace. The first person to notice the danger was Marco, who had been on high alert. He cried out, but the distance was too far and it was too late for him to rescue. Luffy was a little depressed because Ivankov stopped his bean, and he turned his back to the direction where Akainu was attacking. When he heard Marco's exclamation and felt the burning and deadly breath behind him, it was too late. Be careful. Ace pushed Luffy hard, trying to push him away. However, due to his previous injuries and the long-term restraint of sea stone, his body was extremely weak and he was unable to completely avoid Akainu's long-planned attack. Dark Hound. Akainu's roar was like a sentence from hell. His right arm, which had turned into a giant molten claw, pierced Ace's chest fiercely with a terrifying high temperature and destructive force that could burn through steel. Chapter 10. Puff. The hot lava instantly burned Ace's flesh, making a teeth-grinding sizzling sound. Ace's body shook violently, his eyes widened instantly due to the severe pain, and his pupils contracted sharply. He lowered his head and looked at the lava arm that pierced his chest and exuded a pungent sulfur smell in disbelief. Ace. Luffy staggered a few steps after being pushed by Ace, and when he turned around, he saw this scene that made him tremble with fear. His mind went blank in an instant, as if the whole world had lost its sound and color. Akainu showed a hideous sneer on his face, and he was about to further stimulate the magma to completely burn Ace's internal organs. However, at this critical moment, a huge impact force hit from the side. A hole. Whitebeard. The severely injured old man had come close to Akainu without him noticing. His scarred fist, covered with the white halo of the shock fruit, hit Akainu's waist fiercely. Bang! Akainu was hit hard by the punch and groaned. His molten body was twisted unnaturally. He was blown away by the huge force and hit the metal wall in the distance. With a loud bang, he barely managed to stabilize his body. His molten arm that pierced Ace's chest was also forced to withdraw. Ace's body lost its support and fell backwards limply. Ace! Luffy let out a heart-wrenching cry. He rushed over as fast as he could and hugged Ace tightly in his arms before he fell to the ground. Warm blood gushed out from the horrific through wound on Ace's chest, quickly staining Luffy's collar and the cold metal floor red. The edge of the wound was charred black, emitting a pungent smell of burnt flesh. Ace's life force was fading away like a flood. His face turned pale as paper at a visible speed, and his eyes began to blur and lose focus. He opened his mouth, as if he wanted to say something to Luffy, but only a faint ho-ho sound came out of his throat, and blood continued to flow out of his mouth. Luffy hugged Ace tightly, his body shaking violently with fear and anger. He could clearly feel that his brother's body was rapidly getting colder, and the familiar heartbeat was getting weaker and weaker, as if it would stop at any time. Ace! Ace, hold on, don't die! Luffy's voice was choked with sobs, and tears as big as beans rolled down from his eyes like pearls that had broken off the string, hitting Ace's pale face. He had never felt so helpless and desperate. He tried desperately to cover the wound on Ace's chest with his hands, but the wound was too big and the blood could not be stopped. Instead, it kept flowing out from between his fingers. He could feel that Ace's life was disappearing bit by bit at his fingertips. Why is this happening? Luffy let out a desperate roar, his voice filled with endless pain and unwillingness. He couldn't accept it. He couldn't accept that he had tried his best, gone through so many hardships, and finally saved Ace from the execution platform, but he had to watch him die in his arms. All around them, members of the Whitebeard pirates were also in great grief and anger. Captain Ace! A whole Akainu! I'll kill you! Marco, Jaws and the others rushed towards Akainu, who had just stabilized himself, with red eyes, desperately, wanting to avenge Ace. However, other marine generals, such as Aokiji, Kizaru and the marine vice-admirals, also reacted quickly and stood in front of them, and a fierce conflict broke out again between the two sides. But at this moment, the focus of the battlefield was undoubtedly the dying Ace in Luffy's arms. On the marine side, Marshal Sengoku looked at this scene with a complicated look. Although Ace's death was part of his plan, he was not unmoved when he saw Luffy's desperate look. However, as a marine marshal, he had to put the overall situation first. Akainu wiped the bloodline from the corner of his mouth, his eyes became even colder. He glanced at the side of his waist that was hit by Whitebeard. Although it was not fatally injured, it was also in great pain. He looked coldly at Ace in Luffy's arms and said in a deep voice, "The bloodline of the pirates must be completely eliminated. This is the execution of justice." He was about to step forward again and end Ace's life once and for all. However, Luffy's action stunned everyone. Luffy held Ace in his arms, feeling his brother's almost imperceptible breathing and his gradually lifeless eyes. His mind was blank, as if all his thoughts had been drained away. Despair was like a cold tide, completely drowning him. He didn't know what to do. He had no way. He was not a doctor. He didn't have the ability to bring people back to life. He could only watch Ace leave him. At this moment, a strange, almost imperceptible fragrance suddenly floated out of his pocket and entered his nostrils. This scent. Luffy's mind was like a flash of electricity. He suddenly remembered the bag of mysterious beans that fell out of the wall compartment just now. The fragrance made him feel very comfortable when he smelled it, as if it carried some kind of strange vitality. He didn't know what it was, and Ivankov had warned him not to eat it. But now, Ace was dying. He had no other choice. This was the only hope he could think of at the moment. Even if there was only a 1 in 10,000 chance, he had to try. Beans. That's right. Beans. A crazy light flashed in Luffy's eyes, as if he had grasped the last straw. He trembled and took out the plain cloth bag from his pocket with his hands stained with Ace's blood. Because of nervousness and panic, his movements seemed a little clumsy and he almost dropped the bag on the ground several times. He anxiously untied the rope at the mouth of the bag and took out a brightly colored bean the size of Anko. That's it. The strange fragrance became even stronger. Ace. Ace. You must hold on. Luffy choked, his voice full of pleading. He looked at Ace who was unable to swallow on his own and had his lips slightly open, and a trace of determination flashed in his eyes. He no longer hesitated and stuffed the red bean into Ace's mouth regardless of everything. The bean was small and smooth. Luffy carefully used his fingers to push the bean inward along the back of Ace's tongue, trying to help him swallow it. The people around, whether they were the Marines and pirates who were fighting fiercely, or those who were watching from a distance, were all stunned by Luffy's sudden and inexplicable behavior. Chapter 11. What is Straw Hat doing? What did he feed Ace? No one knew what that little bean was, and no one had any hope for it. After all, Ace had a fatal penetrating wound on his chest, and it was caused by the lava of Akainu. Not to mention ordinary medicine, even the legendary panacea would probably not be able to cure it. Everyone thought that Ace was dead. Luffy's actions seemed to them to be a futile struggle out of despair. However, what happened next plunged the entire hall into a deathly silence, making everyone's eyes almost pop out of their sockets, and their worldviews suffered an unprecedented severe impact. The red bean that Luffy stuffed into Ace's mouth seemed to melt the moment it touched Ace's throat. Then, an indescribable, warm and pure energy flowed from Ace's throat into his limbs like a trickle. The next moment, a miracle happened. The horrific penetrating wound on Ace's chest, which was still oozing blood, began to change amazingly at a speed visible to the naked eye. The scorched and necrotic flesh and blood tissues by the lava quickly fell off and regenerated as if they were injected with powerful vitality. New pink granulation tissues grew out at an astonishing speed, filling the hideous wounds. Broken blood vessels reconnected, and broken bones repaired themselves. It only takes a few seconds. Yes, just a few seconds. The horrific wound on Ace's chest that was originally fatal was actually, completely healed. There was not a single scar left, and his skin was as smooth as before, as if he had never suffered such a serious injury. Then, Ace's face, which was as pale as paper, quickly regained its rossiness at a speed visible to the naked eye. His breathing, which was so weak that it was almost unnoticeable, began to become even and strong. His eyes, which had lost their spirits due to the loss of vitality, also regained their brilliance. Cough, cough, cough. Ace coughed violently a few times, and a mouthful of foul air with a slightly burnt smell came out of his mouth. Then, he slowly opened his eyes. A trace of confusion flashed across his eyes, as if he didn't know where he was. But soon, he saw Luffy's crying and laughing face, covered with tears and blood. Luffy. Ace's voice was a little hoarse, but full of life. He subconsciously raised his hand and touched his chest. It was smooth and intact, without any pain. He moved his body and found that not only were his injuries gone, but his body was filled with unprecedented strength, as if all his fatigue and weakness had been swept away, and his physical strength had returned to its peak state. What is going on? He clearly remembered that the lava from Akainu pierced his chest. The excruciating pain and the despair of his life force fading away were all still vivid in his mind. He thought he was dead. But now, Ace's instant recovery and his lively state made everyone present completely stunned as if they were under a spell. The entire vast alien hall fell into a silence that was even more eerie and suffocating than before. The Marines and pirates who were fighting fiercely stopped what they were doing at the same time and looked at Ace and Luffy in disbelief. Akainu Sakazuki, the instigator of the attack on Ace, was also completely stunned at this moment. His face, twisted by anger, was now filled with shock and disbelief. He stared at the intact skin on Ace's chest, then looked at his lava arm that still had the scent of Ace's blood and burnt flesh, and his brain was a little confused for a while. No. Impossible. Akainu roared in disbelief. He knew very well the power of his Dark Hound. That blow was enough to melt steel and completely destroy anyone's heart. Ace had clearly been fatally wounded, how could he have completely recovered in just a few seconds? And he looked even more energetic than before the injury. This is illogical. This is totally contrary to his understanding of the world. Ace, Captain Ace. After a brief silence, an earth-shaking cheer broke out in the Whitebeard pirates' camp. The grief and anger on the faces of captains like Marco, Jaws, and Baista were instantly replaced by ecstasy. They were so excited that tears welled up in their eyes, and some even cried with joy and choked up. Great! Captain Ace is okay. Is this a miracle? They had just witnessed Ace being severely injured by Akainu, and the feeling of despair made them feel miserable. But at this moment, Ace was resurrected like a phoenix from the ashes. This huge contrast from hell to heaven made them extremely excited. On the Marine side, everyone looked pale and silent. Marshal Sengoku's face turned livid. He stared at Ace, then looked at the inconspicuous bag in Luffy's hand, his eyes full of horror and solemnity. The recovery method that was beyond common sense and almost miraculous made him feel a deep fear from the bottom of his heart. What on earth is this? Is it some unknown devil fruit ability? Or, some mysterious power that they have never come into contact with? If this thing can be mass-produced, how can the Marines fight? Any seriously injured and dying soldier can be instantly restored to his original state with just a small bean. This is simply cheating. For the first time, Aokiji Kyuzan showed a genuine look of surprise on his face. He pushed up his sunglasses, as if he wanted to see more clearly. He could feel that the renewed vitality in Ace was so vigorous and pure, unlike any known treatment that could achieve this effect. Kizaru Borsellino also put away his cynical expression, and his eyes flickered with doubt. Oh my, this really scared me. His tone no longer had the ease it had before. As for the ordinary Marine soldiers, they were terrified by the scene before their eyes. Many of them even began to wonder if they were dreaming. A person, with a pierced chest, could recover completely within a few seconds. This was even more bizarre than the legendary myth. And at the center of all this, Luffy was currently hugging the restored Ace, crying and laughing, like a child who had gotten his favorite toy. Chapter 12. Ace. Ace. You're okay. So good. Woo. Luffy's face was covered with tears and snot. He hugged Ace tightly, as if he was afraid that he would disappear again. The great joy of regaining what he had lost made him a little incoherent. Ace felt Luffy's genuine joy and worry, and his heart was filled with warmth and emotion. He gently patted Luffy on the back, and a long-lost, heartfelt smile appeared on his face. Yeah, I'm fine, Luffy. Ace's voice was full of strength, thank you. He knew that it must be the thing Luffy had given him to eat that saved his life. Although he didn't know what it was, he could feel that it contained unimaginable life energy. Ace stood up from Luffy's arms and stretched his body. He could clearly feel the surging power in his body, as if he had endless energy. He clenched his fists, and flames burst out from his arms with a whoosh, more vigorous and hotter than ever before. He glanced at Akainu, whose face was livid not far away, and a hint of cold murderous intent flashed in his eyes. Then, he turned his head and gave Luffy a smile full of gratitude and fondness. I'm sorry to have worried you, brother. This scene was deeply imprinted in the hearts of everyone present. A person who should have died was resurrected in such an incredible way, which brought an immeasurable impact to the entire battlefield. Whitebeard Edward Newgate had been watching all this silently. When he saw that Ace had really recovered and stood up again, his old face full of wrinkles and scars finally revealed a smile of relief from the bottom of his heart. He knew that his life was coming to an end. Whether it was the previous injuries or the force he had just used to save Ace, his already exhausted body was even worse. He could feel that the Shinigami was approaching him step by step. But if he could buy some more time, if he could do more for these children whom he treated as his own. Whitebeard's eyes fell on the inconspicuous cloth bag in Luffy's hand. A trace of determination and hope flashed in his eyes. He took a difficult step forward, his voice hoarse but full of unquestionable majesty. "Ace, Luffy boy, well done." Ace and Luffy both looked towards Whitebeard. "Dad." Ace felt a pain in his heart when he saw Whitebeard's old and tired appearance. Whitebeard nodded slightly, then his eyes turned to Jaws and Marco. Jaws and Marco were both smart people, and they understood Whitebeard's intentions immediately. They also saw Ace's miraculous recovery, and naturally thought of the bag of mysterious beans. "Straw Hat Boy." Yozu's huge body came to Luffy in an instant with an agility that was inconsistent with his size. "Hey!" Luffy was still immersed in the joy of Ace's recovery, looking at Jaws in a daze. Marco followed closely behind, with a solemn and expectant look on his face. "Give us the cloth bag in your hand." Jaws' voice was a little hurried, but it carried a tone that could not be refused. Luffy was stunned for a moment, and subconsciously glanced at the bag in his hand. Although he didn't know how magical this bean was, since it could save Ace, it must be a good thing. However, if his father's captains wanted it, he would not be stingy. "Oh, okay." Luffy readily handed the bag in his hand to Jaws. Jaws took the bag and it felt heavy in his hand. He could feel that there were still a lot of beans in it. He and Marco looked at each other and saw a glimmer of hope in each other's eyes. They knew that Dad's body had reached its limit. But if this mysterious bean really had such a heaven-defying effect, then maybe their father still has a chance of survival. Perhaps the Whitebeard pirates still have a chance to turn defeat into victory. This thought, like a spark that set the field ablaze, instantly ignited in Jaws and Marco's hearts. They held the sack tightly, as if holding their last hope. Their eyes were cast towards the huge figure in the distance who was still standing but looked extremely tired, their father, Edward Newgate. Senzu Beans, a mysterious object from an unknown palace, after resurrecting Ace, seemed to be creating new waves in the aftermath of the Summit War. Jaws and Marco tightly grasped the cloth bag they received from Luffy, their hearts filled with indescribable excitement and anticipation. They had just witnessed the miracle of Ace recovering from near death to his peak in an instant, which made them place high hopes on the mysterious red beans in the bag. Their eyes were all directed to the figure standing like a mountain not far away, but with obvious signs of aging, their father, Edward Newgate. Whitebeard's injuries were even worse than Ace's. The sword wounds that pierced his body, the charred skin from being burned by the magma, and the huge consumption caused by the long-term high-intensity battle had already exhausted the world's strongest man. Although he was still standing at this moment, his slightly trembling body and heavy and suppressed breathing showed that he was already at the end of his strength. "Dad." Marco's voice trembled a little, and he came to Whitebeard as fast as he could. Xiao Zai followed closely behind. He carefully opened the cloth bag, and a strange fragrance filled the air again. Whitebeard looked at the bags in their hands, then glanced at Ace who was full of energy not far away, and a glimpse of understanding flashed in his eyes. He grinned, with a hint of fatigue in his smile, but also a hint of expectation. "Gulala. It seems that God doesn't want me to meet that guy Roger so early." Whitebeard's voice was still hoarse, but with a little more strength. Marco said nothing more. He quickly took out a few red beans from the bag. These beans were warm to the touch and emitted a faint energy fluctuation. He carefully put these beans to Whitebeard's mouth. "Dad, please take this." Marco's voice was full of earnestness. Whitebeard opened his mouth without hesitation. He believed in his sons and the miracle that had just happened to Ace. Whitebeard swallowed several senzu beans. Similar to Ace's situation at that time, the senzu beans melted in his mouth, turning into a warm and pure torrent that quickly flowed to every corner of Whitebeard's body. Chapter 13. The next moment, a scene that once again stunned everyone present happened. The hideous wounds on Whitebeard's body, whether they were the deep wounds from the swords of the marine generals, or the charred and ulcerated wounds from the Akainu lava, all began to heal at an amazing speed visible to the naked eye. The dead tissue quickly fell off, and new flesh and blood regenerated at an incredible speed. In those wounds deep enough to see the bone, muscle fibers quickly connected and the skin covered them again. In those burnt areas, the charred scabs fell off, revealing the pink new skin underneath. There was a faint smell of burning and blood in the air, but it was soon replaced by the strange fragrance of the magic beans. Whitebeard's face, which had been extremely pale due to excessive blood loss, quickly returned to its normal rosy color. His back, which had been somewhat hunched due to extreme fatigue, also slowly straightened up. He took a deep breath, and his chest rose and fell vigorously, making a sound like a bellows. Although, the effect of the magic beans did not seem to allow him to fully recover to the peak state of his youth, after all, he suffered not only physical trauma, but also the ruthless erosion of time and the accumulation of old illnesses, but, just these few beans were enough for him to regain his footing, get rid of his dying state, and recover a considerable amount of his fighting power. Gulala. I haven't felt this feeling for a long time. Whitebeard stretched his muscles and bones, making a series of crackling sounds. He could clearly feel a strong force emerging in his body again. Although it was not as strong as in his heyday, it was a world of difference compared to the previous state where he had difficulty even standing. He slowly stretched out his hand and tightly grasped the Naginata Kurokumokiri that was inserted beside him. The huge weapon that had accompanied him for most of his life seemed to have regained its vitality in his hands. A terrifying haki that made people's heart palpitate suddenly erupted from Whitebeard's body again, spreading in all directions like a materialized shock wave. Although it was not as overwhelming as before, it still carried the majesty and unquestionable strength of a king. Dad! Dad is recovered! The members of the Whitebeard pirates once again burst into deafening cheers. Their faces were filled with the joy of surviving the disaster and the rekindled hope. Their backbone, their legendary captain, once again stood before them. The marine side, on the other hand, fell into complete deathly silence. Marshal Sengoku's face was so gloomy that it seemed like water was dripping out of it. He stared at Whitebeard, then looked at Luffy, his eyes full of disbelief and deep fear. First it was Ace, now it's Whitebeard. What is the origin of this mysterious bean that can instantly heal fatal injuries? What huge changes will it bring to this war, no, to the entire world? Akainu Sakazuki's expression at this moment could no longer be described as shock, it was a complex expression mixed with rage, confusion and a hint of barely perceptible fear. He had just barely recovered from the shock of Ace's resurrection and was about to launch another attack to completely wipe out the two pirates' leaders to uphold marine justice. But before he could do anything, Whitebeard, who should have been exhausted and close to death, actually, also recovered a considerable amount of combat power in the same incredible way. This is impossible. This is absolutely impossible. Akainu let out a low growl like a wild beast from his throat, his eyes were bloodshot with anger. In his opinion, this is simply a blasphemy against justice. Pirates, these vicious criminals, should be severely tried and punished. How can they have such a cheating recovery method? How can he tolerate this? Witchcraft. This must be some kind of evil witchcraft. Akainu roared, his body turned into boiling lava again, emitting suffocating heat. He would never allow these pirates to escape. He could not tolerate the marine's justice being played by such absurd means. Whitebeard. Ace. You two are the source of evil. Today, I will wipe you out here. In the name of justice. Akainu's anger, like the lava in his body, completely erupted. His huge lava right arm condensed into shape again, larger and hotter than before, with the momentum of destroying the world and burning everything, and attacked Ace and Whitebeard who had just recovered. Great eruption. The huge lava fist, like a volcanic eruption, carried with it terrifying high temperature and destructive force that was enough to melt steel in an instant. It tore through the air, emitted a shrill whistling sound, and slammed heavily at the father and son. This time, Akainu was really angry. He wanted to use his most powerful force to completely destroy these two pirates who kept challenging his bottom line. Facing Akainu's angry, unstoppable and fatal blow, Ace, who had just recovered his strength, had a sharp cold light flashing in his eyes. He no longer hesitated or retreated. The Senzu Beans not only healed his injuries and restored his physical strength, but also allowed him to control his fire power to a whole new level. He could feel that the fire power in his body was more obedient and stronger than ever before. Dad, let me do it. Ace growled, took a step forward and stood in front of Whitebeard. He clasped his hands together suddenly, then suddenly opened them, and a flame far hotter than ever before burst out from his palms. Great Flame Ring. Flame Emperor. It was no longer a simple flame, but a flaming sun that was condensed to the ultimate level and exuded a destructive aura. The size of this Emperor of Flame was larger than ever before, and its color was deeper, showing a heart-pounding dark red color, as if it could devour all light. At the same time, Whitebeard also moved. Although he gave the main attack position to Ace, he did not slack off at all. He held the Naginata Kurokyumokiri tightly with both hands, and the blade was covered with the unique white halo of the shock fruit, and then slashed forward. Air shock. The invisible force of vibration swept forward like a tsunami, and cleverly merged with Ace's Emperor of Flame. Flame and vibration, these two completely different forces, combined in a perfect way at this moment, forming a more terrifying and destructive composite shock wave. Chapter 14. This shock wave that combined fire and vibration, like a roaring dragon, rushed towards Akainu's giant lava fist carrying endless anger. Boom! A deafening roar suddenly exploded in this vast alien hall. Flame, lava, and vibration force, three ultimate destructive energies, collided fiercely in mid-air. An unimaginable energy storm swept wildly in all directions with the collision point as the center. The ground of the entire hall was shaking violently, as if it was about to be torn apart by this terrifying force. The air was burned and distorted, making a sharp whistling sound. The Marines and pirates who were closer were knocked to the ground by the powerful shock wave. Some of the weaker ones were even blown away, spitting blood. Surprisingly, after enduring such a terrifying energy impact, the strange material of this mysterious palace also groaned under the heavy load, and the flashing energy lines on the wall became a little disordered, but the structure of the entire hall was miraculously intact without any damage. This made everyone who noticed this have a deeper respect for the builder of this palace. At the center of the energy collision, the light was blinding and the smoke and dust were so thick that it was impossible to see the specific situation. But soon, the results became apparent. Akainu's huge lava fist, after colliding with the combined shock wave from Ace and Whitebeard, was actually forced to stop abruptly. Not only that, the powerful force that combined fire and vibration continued to advance forward, suppressing Akainu's lava in turn. What? Akainu's eyes flashed with disbelief and horror. He could feel that the opponent's attack came with an unrivaled force. Even the lava that he was so proud of was defeated by this force. Ace and Whitebeard, father and son, stood side by side, with firm eyes and an indomitable aura. Get back! Ace roared, and the power of fire in his body burst out again, pushing the power of Flame Emperor to ultimate. Whitebeard also exerted his strength at the same time, and the power of shock fruit was poured out without reservation. Boom! Another loud bang. Akainu's huge lava fist finally couldn't hold on any longer and was completely crushed by the even more powerful composite shock wave. The remaining lava splashed like fireworks, falling on the ground, making a hissing sound and emitting bursts of white smoke. Akainu himself was also shaken by the huge recoil force and took several steps back before he could barely stabilize his body. He felt a surge of blood in his chest, a sweet taste in his throat, and he almost spit out a mouthful of blood. His face, which was distorted by anger, now looked even more pale and embarrassed. He was actually forced back by Whitebeard and Ace in a head-on collision. This is a huge humiliation for Akainu, who is known for his powerful attacking power, his belief in absolute justice and his never backing down. A hole! Akainu gritted his teeth, the anger in his eyes almost bursting out. He couldn't accept this result, and he couldn't tolerate these pirates being so arrogant in front of him. However, he also clearly realized that Ace, who had just recovered his strength, had significantly improved his strength compared to before, especially in the use of fire ability, which was more handy and more powerful. And Whitebeard, although not restored to his heyday, was still the man who could destroy the world. The fighting power of the two of them, father and son, should not be underestimated. For a moment, the battle situation seemed to have taken a subtle turn because of the appearance of the Senzu Beans. The Whitebeard pirates, who had been in a desperate situation, rekindled their hope of fighting back because of the successive recovery of Ace and Whitebeard. The Marines, on the other hand, were demoralized by these successive miracles, and were filled with shock and anxiety. The scene of Ace and Whitebeard teaming up to force Akainu back caused a huge shock to the entire battlefield. The aftermath of the fierce battle swept across the entire vast circular hall like a strong wind. Crocodile, the former Shishibukai and sand fruit user, was now dodging the flying lava fragments and violent energy shocks. His signature cigar had long since fallen to the ground, and his face was covered in dust. Although he was always arrogant, he could only choose to temporarily avoid the sharp edge in the face of a battle of this level. He didn't want to be involved in the fight between the three monsters Whitebeard, Ace, and Akainu. Just as he dodged a huge flying rock and pressed his body against the cold metal wall, he caught a glimpse of something strange on the wall out of the corner of his eye. The walls of this circular hall were covered with complex and sophisticated energy lines, which flickered with a light blue light in a regular rhythm. However, Crocodile keenly noticed that the energy lines in the wall area not far in front of him seemed to be a little different from those in other places. The lines here were denser, and the frequency of flashing seemed to be faster, and the color was slightly darker blue. More importantly, the direction of these lines faintly formed an outline similar to a rectangular door frame. Crocodile raised his brows slightly, a hint of curiosity rising in his heart. Could it be that there is something hidden here? He is a man of careful thinking and strong observation. In this strange palace, any unusual details may hide important clues, or potential dangers and opportunities. He cautiously took a few steps closer to the area and observed it carefully. The surface of the wall in that area was still that smooth one-piece material, without any traces of seams or switches. If it weren't for the subtle differences in the patterns of the energy lines, no one would have noticed the abnormality here. Crocodile pondered for a moment and decided to give it a try. He stretched out his right hand, and the sand fruit ability was activated, and his arm instantly turned into a sharp sand blade. He controlled the sand blade and carefully scratched the edge of the door frame outlined by the energy line pattern. There was no harsh sound of metal rubbing against each other, nor was there any sign of energy rebound. Just after the sand blade passed, an amazing scene happened. The rectangular wall area outlined by the energy lines actually slid slowly and silently towards the inside of the wall, just like the small compartment triggered by Luffy before. Chapter 15. There was no obstruction at all, and the movements were as smooth as precision machinery. An entrance to a passage about 2 people tall and 1 person wide appeared in front of Crocodile. The light inside the passage was slightly dim, forming a sharp contrast with the soft and bright white light in the hall. A slightly different air from that in the hall, drier and cooler, diffused from the passage. There's something strange indeed. Crocodile's lips curled up slightly, his eyes flashing with a shrewd light. This discovery immediately attracted the attention of some people around. After all, in this unknown environment, any new discovery could affect their fate. Several marine soldiers who were closer also saw the entrance to the room suddenly appearing on the wall, and their faces showed vigilance and curiosity. Crocodile did not enter the room immediately, he just stood at the entrance and looked inside. The room did not seem to be very big, and some instruments emitting faint light could be vaguely seen inside. At this moment, Akainu was forced to retreat and gathered his strength to launch a new round of attack. Whitebeard and Ace were also ready, and the battle between the two sides was about to break out. Crocodile knew that now was not a good time to explore. He just silently noted the location and prepared to wait for a break in the battle or find a suitable opportunity to go in and explore. However, the development of things is often unexpected. As the battle between Whitebeard, Ace, and Akainu became more intense, the vibrations in the entire hall became stronger and stronger. Some of the debris that were originally placed against the wall or scattered in the corners due to the previous suction began to shake. Not far from the entrance to the room that Crocodile discovered, several marine soldiers were gathered together, watching the movements in the center of the battlefield vigilantly. One of the young marine soldiers lost his balance because the ground beneath his feet suddenly shook violently, and he subconsciously reached out to the wall next to him for support. His hand happened to press on a sensing area on the wall that was similar to the metal protrusion that Luffy had pressed before, but more hidden. Beep. A slight electronic beep sounded. Then, a locker slightly larger than the previous compartment slid open silently on the wall in front of the marine soldier. Inside the locker, dozens of oddly shaped single-lens instruments were neatly arranged. These instruments looked very sophisticated. The main part was a bracket that could be worn on the ear or fixed on the side of the head. The bracket was connected to a transparent green monocle that was about half the size of a palm. Next to the lens, there were several small buttons with some incomprehensible symbols engraved on them. What is this? The young marine soldier was stunned for a moment, then curiously picked up a single lens instrument from the locker. The instrument is made of light material and does not cause any discomfort when worn on the head. He followed the example of his companion and put the instrument on his left eye, then casually pressed the button next to the lens. The moment he pressed the button, pale blue light suddenly appeared on the originally transparent green lens. Then, a series of golden numbers that were twisted like tadpoles and that he could not understand at all flashed rapidly across the lens like a waterfall. At the same time, a series of rapid beep-beep electronic prompt sounds came from the instrument and directly into his ears. Wow! What is this? The young marine soldier was startled by the sudden change and exclaimed subconsciously. Several of his companions beside him also noticed his abnormality and gathered around him curiously. Hey, what did you find? Asked an old soldier. The young soldier shook his head in confusion, facing a companion standing opposite him. He found that the rapidly flashing golden numbers in his left eye lens stabilized after a few seconds and finally stopped at a specific value. That value is 5. Then, another line of golden text appeared in the lens, which he also couldn't understand. It seemed to be some kind of annotation on the number. What does this mean? The young soldier was even more confused. He didn't know what the numbers and words in the lens meant. But he had a vague feeling that this strange single lens instrument seemed to be a kind of observation device? Or a kind of detection instrument? The number 5 that appeared in the lens seemed to have some connection with the companion standing opposite him. This unexpected discovery, like a stone thrown into a calm lake, once again caused a new ripple in this alien hall full of unknowns. What are these mysterious single lens instruments, and what do they do? The answer to this question may be revealed soon, and the impact it brings will surely be far-reaching and unknown. The young marine soldier became the focus of everyone's attention for accidentally discovering and activating the strange single lens instrument. He seemed a little overwhelmed as he wore the instrument that kept beeping and had numbers and unknown words flashing in the lens. Hey, kid, what the hell is that? A Marine Rear Admiral asked with a frown, a hint of impatience and curiosity in his tone. I don't know, sir. The young soldier stammered, I just pressed it randomly and it happened like this. At this moment, a golden light flashed, and Marine Admiral Kizaru Borsellino had come to the side of the young soldier without knowing when. He still had that iconic, slightly obscene smile on his face, but there was a hint of curiosity in his eyes that was hard to conceal. Oh my, this looks like something very interesting. Kizaru stretched out his hand and said in his unique slow voice, let me take a look. The young soldier dared not disobey the Admiral's order, and quickly took off the single lens instrument on his head and handed it to Kizaru respectfully. Kizaru took the strange-looking instrument and played with it in his hand. His fingers fiddled with the small buttons next to the lens, as if he was studying their functions. The workmanship is quite exquisite. Kizaru nodded, then imitated the soldier just now and put the instrument on his left eye. He first casually glanced at the marines around him, and immediately a series of golden numbers that he couldn't understand appeared on his lens, accompanied by a series of beep-beep prompt sounds. He found that when he looked at different soldiers, the numbers displayed on the lens would change accordingly, some higher, some lower. Chapter 16. Interesting. Kizaru's mouth corners slightly raised, he became more and more interested in this new thing. His gaze inadvertently fell on the figure standing like a mountain not far away, Whitebeard Edward Newgate. At this moment, Whitebeard had just recovered a considerable amount of his combat power with the help of Senzu Beans, and was standing side by side with Ace, emitting a terrifyingly powerful haki, and watching Akainu opposite him vigilantly. Kizaru pointed his left eye, which was equipped with a single lens instrument, at Whitebeard. The moment his eyes met Whitebeard, the scene in his left lens suddenly changed drastically. The golden numbers that were jumping before disappeared instantly, and were replaced by a string of new numbers that were so long that they almost overflowed the edge of the lens. This string of numbers was so huge that Kizaru couldn't count how many digits it had. Moreover, this string of numbers is not static, but is jumping wildly at an extremely fast speed. Huge changes are taking place every moment, as if representing some extremely unstable but extremely powerful source of energy. Bib 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 bib. The warning sound from the instrument became more rapid and sharper than ever before, as if it was sounding the highest level of alarm. Kizaru felt that his left eye was dazzled by the string of dazzling golden numbers, and his ears were numb by the piercing alarm. The iconic casual and cynical expression on his face, at this moment, for the first time, truly froze. Instead, there was a kind of shock and horror that was hard to conceal from the heart. He blinked subconsciously, and then took another careful look to make sure he was not mistaken. The string of frighteningly long numbers in the lens was still jumping wildly, and each number seemed to carry 1,000-pound force, hitting his heart hard. This value. Kizaru has been in the naval headquarters for many years, and has fought with countless strong men and witnessed all kinds of powerful strength. However, he has never seen, nor imagined, that a person's strength can be expressed in such an intuitive and terrifying number. Moreover, this number far exceeded any number he had seen before, including his own, the other marine admirals, and even Marshal Sengoku and the hero Garp. Oh my! Kizaru subconsciously let out a low exclamation. For the first time, his eyes, which usually seemed a little lazy, revealed a truly complex expression that was a mixture of surprise, solemnity, and a hint of awe. He put away his usual nonchalant attitude, and his voice became a little dry. This is really an extraordinary monster. The monster he was referring to was naturally Whitebeard, who was not far away. Although he had long known that Whitebeard was very strong and the strongest man in the world, it was not until this moment, through this strange single-lens instrument, that he felt Whitebeard's unfathomable and terrifying strength in an unprecedented and more intuitive way. Even though he was severely injured and had just recovered some of his strength with the help of the mysterious beans, the values displayed by Whitebeard still reached a daunting and unattainable height. Although Kizaru's whisper was not loud, most of the people present were strong and perceptive, so they naturally heard his words. Combined with the rare shocked expression on his face and the mysterious single-lens instrument in his hand, many people immediately realized that this new gadget was probably more than just a simple observation device. The other Marine generals, as well as some members of the CP organization, all had a glimmer of curiosity and inquiry in their eyes. Admiral Kizaru, what exactly is that thing? A Marine Vice Admiral couldn't help but ask. Kizaru took a deep breath and managed to calm down the shock in his heart. He shook his head, as if trying to get rid of the string of terrifying numbers in the lens. Well, I'm not sure either. Kizaru's tone returned to normal, but the solemnity in his eyes had not completely disappeared. However, it seems to be able to, see some things that we can't normally see. As he said this, he turned his gaze away from Whitebeard and looked at the other captains of the Whitebeard pirates. When he saw the Phoenix Marco, the numbers in the lens were not as terrifying as Whitebeard's, but they also reached a very astonishing level, and there were some special marks behind the numbers, which seemed to represent Marco's powerful recovery and flying abilities. When he saw Diamond Jaws, the number was also not low, and there seemed to be words like extremely high defense marked behind it. Flower Sword Vista and several other captains also displayed different values and characteristics representing their respective strengths in their lenses. Oh my, it seems that the Whitebeard pirates are really full of talented people. Kizaru said with a hint of inexplicable meaning in his tone. At this moment, several Marine soldiers took out more single-lens instruments from the sliding locker. Marine Marshal Sengoku and Hero Garp also showed great interest in this new gadget. They each took one from the soldier and put it on their eyes. Marshal Sengoku first pointed the instrument at himself. The lens immediately displayed a series of values representing his strength, which was quite high, consistent with his identity and strength as a Marine Marshal. Then, he looked at Garp beside him. The value displayed in Garp's lens was actually slightly higher than his, and there seemed to be a note behind it like pure ultimate power. This made Marshal Sengoku's mouth twitch involuntarily. This old BD is still so strong. Then, Sengoku pointed the instrument at Akainu. Akainu's stats were equally impressive, representing his terrifying attack power. Aokiji's stats were balanced in terms of attack, defense, and control. Kizaru's stats were particularly outstanding in terms of speed and energy output. The three admirals all possessed powerful strength that matched their status. However, when they pointed the instruments at the masters of the Whitebeard pirates, the expressions on their faces gradually became solemn. Whitebeard's stats, which kept jumping like astronomical figures, had already shocked them deeply. After taking the Senzu Beans, Ace's stats also soared to a level comparable to that of Marine Admiral, and his fire ability stats were particularly outstanding, and there seemed to be a huge potential mark behind it. Chapter 17. Captains such as Marco, Jaws, and Vista have also shown extremely high values in their respective fields. These cold and direct figures, like ruthless slaps in the face, slapped some Marine high-ranking officials hard. They mercilessly revealed the desperate gap between the top combat forces of both sides, as well as the terrifying overall strength of the Whitebeard pirates. Especially when some Marine Vice Admirals and Rear Admirals pointed the detectors at themselves, the captains of the Whitebeard pirates, and even some elite crew members, the difference in the values displayed in their lenses made them feel deeply powerless. How is this possible? A Marine Rear Admiral looked at the pitiful 2-digit number in his lens, then looked at the 3-digit number displayed in the lens of an ordinary crew member of the Whitebeard pirates not far away. His face turned pale and dense cold sweat oozed from his forehead. Our strength is actually so much worse than theirs. An atmosphere of uneasiness and unrest began to spread quietly in the Marine camp. After seeing these cruel figures, some middle and lower level officers even showed despair and fear. The Marine's strong Yamato justice that they had always believed in seemed a little pale and powerless in the face of these cold figures. Even Marshal Sengoku's face became extremely solemn after seeing these data. He knew very well that if Whitebeard was not old and weak, and if he had not been seriously injured, if the Marines had not taken advantage of the terrain and numbers, and if they had not used various strategies, the outcome of this summit war would have been unpredictable. And now, because of the appearance of these mysterious beans and these mysterious detectors, the war situation seems to have added more uncertainty. Who left these instruments? Marshal Sengoku was full of doubts and vigilance. This mysterious palace, and the unimaginable level of technology it displayed, made him feel a deep chill. Just as the Marine camp was in an uproar because of these combat power detectors, a gloomy and greedy eye also set its sights on these new gadgets. Blackbeard Marshal D. Teach, the ambitious former member of the Whitebeard Pirates, is hiding in a relatively secluded corner at this moment with excitement and calculation in his eyes. He had just noticed the movements of the Marines, as well as the strange-looking single-lens instruments in the hands of the soldiers. He was keenly aware that these things were probably very important. Taking advantage of the chaos, he quietly eliminated a lone Marine soldier and snatched a combat effectiveness detector from him. Ha 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 ha, let me see what kind of interesting toy this is. Blackbeard let out a low and suppressed laugh, and he couldn't wait to put the detector on his right eye. He first turned his gaze to the figure that made him both respect and fear, Whitebeard. Similar to what Kizaru saw, Blackbeard's lens was instantly filled with a string of frighteningly long, madly jumping golden numbers. The terrifying number representing absolute power made Blackbeard's pupils shrink suddenly, and a trace of deep fear and a trace of, even more blazing greed flashed in his eyes. As expected of my father. Even at this point, he is still so powerful. Blackbeard licked his cracked lips and thought to himself. He knew that if he wanted to replace Whitebeard and become the new overlord of the sea, he had to cross this mountain. Then, his gaze turned to the other side, to the Straw Hat Boy who was fighting alongside Ace, Monkey D. Luffy. Blackbeard was filled with mixed emotions towards this young man who had repeatedly ruined his plans and also possessed the will of D. There was anger, disdain, and a hint of inexplicable concern. When Blackbeard pointed the detector at Luffy, the number displayed in the lens was not particularly high. Compared with those long-established strong men, such as the Marine Admiral or the captains of the Whitebeard Pirates, Luffy's number seemed a little low. However, just as Blackbeard was about to sneer and look away, he suddenly noticed that behind Luffy's not too high number, there appeared a line of special marks that were constantly flashing and marked with even more dazzling golden text. Although Blackbeard couldn't understand the specific meaning of that line of text, he could feel a strong and unique energy fluctuation from the shape and flashing frequency of those words. It seemed to foreshadow some kind of infinite possibilities. If Whitebeard's value represents the ultimate of the present, then the special mark behind Luffy's value is more like telling the infinity of the future. Blackbeard's pupils shrank suddenly when he saw the special mark. His breathing also became a little rapid. This is... He stared at Luffy intently, with unprecedented greed and heat bursting out of his eyes. He had a strong intuition that the Straw Hat Boy was definitely not as simple as he seemed. The potential he possessed was probably far beyond everyone's imagination. Ha 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 ha. Interesting. Really interesting. Blackbeard let out a low and crazy laugh, his fat body trembling slightly with excitement. He originally just viewed Luffy as a slightly troublesome kid, but now, after seeing the huge potential mark displayed by the detector, his interest in Luffy instantly reached a new level. He began to re-examine his plan. Perhaps, this Straw Hat Boy could become an important chess piece on his road to future dominance, or a more valuable prey. In Blackbeard's heart, the flame of greed grew stronger and stronger, as if it was going to devour the entire world. On this side of the hall, the appearance of the combat power detector triggered a series of chain reactions, making the atmosphere on the battlefield even more tense and weird. At the same time, some unexpected incidents occurred on the other side of the hall. Buggy, the clown, a man whose luck is sometimes good and sometimes bad but who always manages to do something at critical moments, is now furtively rummaging through something in a relatively remote corner. He did not participate in the direct conflict between the Marine and the Whitebeard Pirates, but took advantage of the chaos and tried to find some treasure in this mysterious palace with his group of improvised prisoners. After all, in his opinion, such a large and magnificent palace must contain a lot of valuable things. Hey! You guys! Hurry up! Bring everything that looks valuable to me! Buggy put his hands on his hips and shouted loudly to his men. Chapter 18. His men were also desperate criminals, and they were equally eager for treasure. They hurriedly rummaged through the boxes and cabinets in the corners of the hall, hoping to find some gold, silver, and jewelry. However, the style of this palace was too strange. There were no mountains of gold as they had imagined. Instead, there were some strange instruments and equipment that they could not understand at all and were flashing various lights. "Captain Buggy, there doesn't seem to be anything valuable here," said one of his men somewhat disappointedly. "Nonsense! Look carefully. It must be there!" Buggy yelled angrily. He himself was impatiently rummaging around a metal shelf that looked like some kind of storage rack. On the shelf were some strange-shaped metal parts and some tools he didn't recognize. As he was fiddling with the things roughly, he accidentally knocked over a small box on the top shelf. The box fell to the ground, the lid broke open, and several small metal capsules the size of ordinary pills rolled out from inside. These capsules have a silvery metallic luster all over, with a smooth surface and no markings. "Hey? What is this?" Buggy picked up a metal capsule and looked at it carefully. He squeezed it and it felt hard, not like an edible pill. He shook it and there was no sound. "Tisk, what a piece of junk!" Buggy curled his lips, thinking it was some useless metal part. He was in a bad mood, and seeing such an insignificant little thing made him even more upset. He threw the metal capsule in his hand to the side in an unhappily, just like throwing away garbage. The small metal capsule drew an arc in the air, and then fell on the metal ground not far away with a click. Just as the capsule landed on the ground, something strange happened. With just a slight bang sound, the small metal capsule suddenly exploded like a firecracker. A thick white smoke quickly spread from the place where the capsule exploded, instantly covering an area of several meters around it. "Cough cough! What is that?" Buggy was choked by the sudden smoke and coughed a few times, and quickly took a few steps back. His men were also startled. They stopped searching and looked at the white smoke vigilantly. The smoke came quickly and went away quickly. A few seconds later, when the thick white smoke gradually dissipated, revealing the scene on the ground, all the people present who saw this scene were stunned in an instant, as if they were under a spell. "I saw that at the place where the small metal capsule had landed just now, a small flying motorcycle with an extremely sci-fi and futuristic shape appeared out of thin air. The flying motorcycle was a streamlined silver grey in color. It was small and could only accommodate 1 or 2 people. It had no wheels, and underneath it were several jet engine-like devices that were emitting a faint blue light, making the entire vehicle slightly suspended in the air a few centimeters above the ground. The front part was designed very simply, with only a transparent windshield and a few things that looked like operating buttons. This is like magic." A small, inconspicuous metal capsule fell to the ground, exploded into a cloud of smoke, and then such a cool flying motorcycle appeared out of thin air. "Wow!" The first to exclaim were Usopp and Frankie. Usopp's eyes were as big as copper bells, and his mouth was wide open enough to fit an egg. He pointed at the flying motorcycle that appeared out of thin air, his voice trembling with excitement. What is that? It's so cool!" Frankie was so excited that his whole body was shaking, and his mechanical eyes were flashing with fanaticism. As a top shipbuilder and cyborg, he had an almost instinctive obsession with this unimaginable technological creation. "Super!" Frankie struck his signature pose and shouted, This is such advanced technology. It's actually possible to compress something so big into such a small capsule. It's incredible." Not only them, but also the other pirates and marines around them showed disbelief after seeing this scene. Creating objects out of thin air. And such sophisticated and complex mechanical creations. This technology has completely exceeded their understanding of this world. Doflamingo, the heavenly yaksha who calls the shots in the dark world, narrowed his eyes behind his iconic sunglasses. His gaze flickered, full of calculation and greed. Unlike Usopp and Frankie, who only focused on how cool the flying motorcycle itself was, he immediately realized the huge value of this universal capsule or compressed space technology. Portable. Practical. Imagine if we could master this technology, then the transportation and hiding of weapons and equipment, as well as the storage and transfer of valuable materials, would become extremely convenient and efficient. An army would no longer need a huge logistic baggage, but only need to carry some small capsules to transform into tanks, cannons, and even warships when needed. This will be a subversive revolution in the military field. In the commercial field, the application prospects of this technology are equally immeasurable. Doflamingo's mind was instantly filled with countless thoughts of using this technology to make huge profits. The corners of his mouth involuntarily curled up into a sinister and excited smile. He looked at the broken box at Buggy's feet and the remaining metal capsules inside, his eyes filled with undisguised possessiveness. This kind of good thing must be in your own hands. This unexpected discovery, like another blockbuster bomb, once again caused an uproar in this already chaotic alien hall. The combat power detector allows people to intuitively see the power gap. This universal capsule, which can create objects out of thin air, demonstrates a black technology beyond imagination that is enough to change the world. How many unknown secrets and treasures are hidden in this mysterious palace? Everyone's heart was filled with questions, expectations, and a hint of fear. Because they vaguely felt that they seemed to be involved in an Uzumaki campaign that was far more grandiose and more dangerous than they had imagined. Just when everyone was shocked by the flying motorcycle that appeared out of thin air, and ambitious people like Doflamingo began to plan how to take this universal capsule technology for themselves, an even more bizarre and more frightening incident happened without any warning. Chapter 19. The central area of this vast circular hall was originally empty except for the mirror-like metal floor. However, at this moment, the ground suddenly shook slightly, and then a huge, pitch-black, stone-like rectangular object slowly rose from under the ground. This black stone tablet-like object was tens of meters high and more than 10 meters wide. Its surface was as smooth as ink, and it exuded a cold and deadly aura. It stood quietly in the center of the hall, like a silent tombstone, or a door to an unknown world. What is that? A pirate said in a trembling voice, and he felt that his heart was about to jump out of his throat. How many unknown things are hidden in this damn place? Before everyone could recover from this sudden change, the surface of the huge black stone tablet suddenly lit up without any warning. It was not a blinding light, but a dim glow that rippled like water waves. Then, some blurry and distorted images began to emerge and flicker on the surface of the huge black stone tablet, like the film of an old movie. At the same time, a creepy laugh filled with unspeakable malice suddenly echoed throughout the hall. He 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 he. He 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 he. The laughter was sharp and high-pitched, with a childlike innocence, yet it contained a chilling madness and evil. It didn't seem to come from a specific source, but seemed to ring directly in the depths of everyone's mind, like countless tiny steel needles, piercing their nerves fiercely. This sudden strange laughter made everyone present, no matter they were the vicious pirates or the battle-hardened marines, feel a shudder from the depths of their souls. Many weaker people were even irritated by the strange laughter and turned pale, trembling all over, and subconsciously covered their ears, but the laughter was like a leech, still echoing clearly in their minds, making them feel extremely scared and irritated. Even top warriors like Whitebeard, Sengoku, and Garp became extremely solemn when they heard this strange laughter. They could feel that this laughter contained an extremely terrifying spiritual power that could directly affect people's minds. What the hell is this sound? Luffy also felt his scalp tingling. He didn't like this sound that made him feel uncomfortable. What a scary laugh. Chopper was so scared that he hid behind Zoro, trembling all over. The strange laughter continued, like a devil's sound filling the ears, making the atmosphere in the entire hall increasingly weird and depressing. The image emerging on the surface of the huge black stone tablet gradually became clearer amid the creepy laughter. At first, the image was blurry, and only some fast flash, bizarre images of cosmic stars could be seen. But soon, the focus of the image was on a demon whose whole body was a strange pink color, looked a little funny, but also revealed an indescribable evil aura. The demon was not tall, and could even be described as short and fat. He had 2 horns that curved like tentacles, pointed ears, and a smile that was always innocent like a child, but full of teasing and cruelty. He wore a strange outfit that seemed to belong to some cosmic race, and there was a big M mark on his chest. At this moment, this pink demon is floating in the vast starry sky, surrounded by countless stars and nebulae emitting bright light. He seemed to be in a good mood, humming a weird tune and with a creepy smile on his face. Then, in front of everyone's eyes, he did something horrific that no one would ever forget and that would overturn their worldview. The pink demon casually raised his little hand wearing a white glove and pointed to a huge planet emitting a blue light not far away. The planet looked full of life, and there seemed to be a highly developed civilization on it. However, the moment the pink demon's finger pointed at the planet, there was no sign, no fancy moves, and no earth-shaking sound. That huge, beautiful blue planet, just like that, silently, within just a few seconds, began to collapse and disintegrate from the core, and then turned into an endless expanse of cosmic dust. Yes, it's cosmic dust. A huge planet that once nurtured countless lives and carried countless civilizations, completely and cleanly disappeared from the universe with just a flick of the pink devil's finger. Not even a decent explosion occurred, as if it had never existed. And after doing all this, the pink demon still had that innocent yet cruel smile on his face, as if he had just casually crushed an insignificant ant to death, relaxed and unconcerned. Then, the scene changed, and another scene appeared. The pink demon traveled through the universe, constantly destroying planets one after another. Every time he made a move, it seemed so casual and so understated, but the result was a desperate, irreversible, and complete destruction. These devastating scenes, like the most horrific nightmare, brought unprecedented, indescribable visual impact and spiritual shock to everyone watching the scene. Many of them are heroes who have traveled the seas, witnessed all kinds of powerful forces, and experienced countless brutal battles. They have seen swordsmanship that can cut through steel, haki that can cause tsunamis, and the devil fruit ability that can control natural elements. However, they never imagined that there existed such a terrifying and incredible power in this world. Just a finger can destroy a planet. This was completely beyond their comprehension. This was not a power that mortals could possess. This was a power that only gods, or in other words, demons, could possess. If Whitebeard's power that could shatter an island was considered to be enough to destroy the heavens and the earth, then compared to the pink demon in front of them, Whitebeard's power was like a child playing house, not worth mentioning. Chapter 20. The demon's relaxed and comfortable posture, his indifference towards destruction as if it were a child's play, made everyone feel an indescribable coldness and despair. Is this true? A marine soldier muttered to himself, his legs shaking violently with fear, almost unable to stand. He felt that his worldview was completely shattered at this moment. How is it possible? How is it possible that there is such a monster? A pirate's captain's face turned pale, and his voice was filled with undisguised fear. He would rather face 100 marine admirals than face such a terrifying existence that could easily destroy a planet. Even those top experts who hold high positions and have great strength fell into deep silence and shock at this moment. Marshal Sengoku's forehead was covered with cold sweat. He stared at the image on the black stone tablet with horror and solemnity in his eyes. He couldn't imagine what a terrible disaster it would bring if such an existence came to their world. Garp clenched his fists tightly, his knuckles turning white from the force. His eyes, which were usually full of confidence, also showed a rare trace of confusion and uneasiness. Admirals Akainu, Aokiji, and Kizaru were all shocked by the terrifying image, and their faces became extremely serious. The devil fruit abilities they were so proud of seemed so small and ridiculous in front of the power that could destroy a planet. Whitebeard looked at the image, his brows knitted tightly together. He had traveled the seas for decades and thought he was at the top of the world, but at this moment, he had to admit that he was still far behind the pink demon in the image. Gulala. It seems that this starry sky is much more vast and dangerous than we imagined. Whitebeard's voice was a little hoarse, but with a hint of inexplicable emotion. That creepy laugh still echoed throughout the hall, and the image on the black stone tablet kept repeating the horrific scene of the pink demon destroying the planet, like an endless nightmare, deeply imprinted in everyone's mind. The fear of the unknown and the deep awe of the power that could destroy the world were like two invisible mountains, pressing heavily on the hearts of everyone present. The commotion and confrontation previously caused by the Senzu Beans and the combat power detector seemed to be suppressed by this even more terrifying and desperate scene. The atmosphere of irreconcilable hostility between the Marines and the pirates strangely disappeared temporarily at this moment. No one wanted to fight each other anymore, because they all clearly realized that if the existence in the image was real, then the hatred between them would be insignificant and not worth mentioning in the face of such absolute power. A common fear of the unknown and powerful forces, as well as a deep awareness of one's own insignificance and powerlessness, began to spread in everyone's hearts. However, human instincts are complex. Fear is often accompanied by desire. After witnessing a powerful force far beyond their own understanding, some people will inevitably develop a desire for power in addition to fear, as well as a strong desire to possess items that can enhance their own strength. Since this mysterious palace can play such horrifying images, does it and the things hidden inside it also contain secrets that can make them stronger? The magical effect of the Senzu Beans that can bring the dead back to life, the unique function of the combat power detector that can intuitively display strength, and the heaven-defying technology of the universal capsule that can compress space, all these things that have appeared prove the extraordinary nature of this palace. Perhaps, there are more powerful treasures hidden here. This idea quickly spread like wildfire in the hearts of many people. Then, after a brief silence and fear, a crazier and more primitive impulse began to dominate the behavior of everyone present. They all simultaneously and almost subconsciously began to frantically search this huge circular hall and those rooms that had been discovered or had just been forced open by them. They no longer cared about each other's identities, nor did they care about the rules of the battlefield. In their eyes, there was only greed and desire for those items that looked valuable. Quick! Find all those beans! A pirate's captain shouted to his men. He had personally witnessed Ace and Whitebeard being brought back to life with the help of Senzu Beans, so he naturally understood how precious this thing was. Give me all those lenses that can see numbers. Another marine officer, not caring about discipline, ordered the soldiers around him. He knew that if he could master this detector, he would be able to better understand the enemy and his own strength, which would undoubtedly be a huge advantage in future battles. Those who had just witnessed the magic of the universal capsule were like crazy, rummaging frantically around the shelf that Buggy had knocked over and other places where similar items might be stored. For a moment, the entire hall fell into an even more chaotic but also more bizarre state of short truce. Marines and pirates, two originally hostile forces, temporarily put aside their hatred for each other and joined in this crazy search operation because of their fear of unknown forces and their desire for treasure. They were like a swarm of locusts, conducting a carpet search in every corner of the hall and every crevice where items might be hidden. Senzu Beans, combat power detectors, universal capsules, these items that have been proven to have magical effects naturally became their primary targets of plunder. Some people had small-scale conflicts because they were fighting for the same object, but they were quickly drowned out by the more chaotic scene around them. Luffy also joined the treasure hunt, but his goal was simpler. He just wanted to find if there were any other beans that smelled good, or other things that looked delicious. Ace and Whitebeard watched all this with caution and did not participate in the looting. They were more concerned about who the owner of this palace was and the real purpose of the palace. Although Akainu was still filled with rage towards the pirates, after seeing the devastating scene, he temporarily suppressed the urge to take action. Instead, he observed the movements around him with a gloomy face, trying to find some clues. Chapter 21. In this sudden, crazy search involving the entire nation, different people have different focuses due to their own personalities and goals. Crocodile, the far-sighted former Shishibukai, thought that items that were directly used in battle, such as Senzu Beans or detectors, had some value, but he was not very interested in them. He valued more those things that could fundamentally improve his own strength or bring long-term benefits. Unlike others, he did not rush to grab the hot items that had been exposed, but relied on his keen observation to search carefully in some relatively remote and inconspicuous corners. He believes that truly valuable things are often hidden in unknown places. In a corner filled with various discarded metal parts and broken instruments, Crocodile's eyes were attracted by a pile of thin metal sheets scattered on the ground. These metal pieces were about the size of an A4 paper, dark silver in color, of unknown material, cold and hard to the touch. They were written with mysterious golden words similar to those on the palace surface and in the detector lens, twisted like tadpoles, and some complex diagrams that looked like engineering drawings, depicting the structure of a special room. Although Crocodile could not understand the mysterious text, he vaguely recognized some key information from the clear diagrams. The room depicted on the blueprint had a very strange internal structure, and seemed to be equipped with many devices that could generate huge pressure. Beside the blueprint, there were some words marked with more eye-catching golden symbols. Although he still didn't recognize them, with the help of intuition and some graphics, he guessed that the meaning of those words might be related to words such as X times gravity, cultivation, enhancement, and limit. Is this a blueprint for some special training facility? A gleam of light flashed in Crocodile's eyes. He immediately realized that if his guess was true, then the value of this blueprint would probably far exceed those Senzu Beans or universal capsules. He had only heard of this method of training in some ancient legends. If this palace really had this technology and left behind the construction drawings. Crocodile's heartbeat accelerated involuntarily. He carefully put away the stack of metal sheets and hid them in the inner pocket of his windbreaker. He decided that when he had the chance, he must study the blueprint carefully. If possible, he even wanted to take this gravity chamber for himself, or at least learn the relevant technology from it. For someone like him who desires to become stronger and has huge ambitions, this kind of thing that can fundamentally improve his strength is the real treasure. On the other side of the hall, the world's greatest swordsman, Hawkeye Dracula Mihawk, always maintained his unique calm and composure. He did not participate in the frantic looting, nor was he frightened by the devastating images. He just stood quietly in a relatively quiet corner, his sharp eyes scanning everything around him like a hawk, as if he was a bystander. He is not very interested in fancy technology products, such as detectors or universal capsules. For him, only the sword in his hand is the most trustworthy partner. However, just as he was casually glancing at a weapon rack filled with some broken weapons, his eyes were suddenly attracted by an inconspicuous hilt. The hilt of the sword lay quietly in the corner of the weapon rack, covered with dust, looking plain and even a little broken. Compared with the surrounding weapons that were gorgeous or exuded a powerful aura, it seemed so ordinary and inconspicuous. However, Hawkeye sensed an unusual aura from the hilt of the sword. It was a very restrained yet extremely pure energy fluctuation. He walked over slowly, reached out his hand, and picked up the hilt from the weapon rack. The hilt of the sword felt strangely warm. It didn't feel like ordinary metal or wood, but more like jade? Or some unknown crystal of energy. The shape of the hilt is very simple, without any unnecessary decoration, but when held in the hand, it feels comfortable and fits the palm perfectly. Hawkeye looked at the hilt carefully and found that at the top of the hilt, where it was connected to the blade, there seemed to be a small switch that could be pressed, or some kind of energy activation device. Subconsciously, he lightly pressed the switch with his thumb. The moment he pressed the switch, a faint but extremely pure white light suddenly lit up at the top of the hilt. The light flickered like breathing, with a faint sense of energy flowing through it, as if an invisible sword blade made of pure energy was about to extend from the hilt. Energy sword. For the first time, Hawkeye's eyes flashed with a hint of genuine surprise and a hint of indescribable excitement. He could feel that the hilt contained an extremely powerful energy that could be guided and controlled. If he could find a suitable method to fully activate it, the energy blade it could form would be as sharp and powerful as any legendary sword. Even worse than that. This is undoubtedly a huge temptation for a swordsman who has been pursuing the ultimate kendo all his life. Hawkeye tightly grasped the glowing hilt of the sword, his eyes full of concentration and inquiry. He knew that he might have discovered something extraordinary. This mysterious palace, like a huge treasure house, constantly shows them all kinds of miracles and treasures beyond imagination. And every new discovery is constantly impacting their cognition, and is constantly changing the direction of this summit war, and the future of this world. Just as the entire alien hall was thrown into chaos by the devastating images and the subsequent crazy plundering, an even more terrifying incident occurred again. Boom boom. There was a dull and violent noise, like thunder from the sky exploding in the ears, and the entire huge palace, without any warning, began to shake violently. This shaking was much stronger and more lasting than any of the previous shaking caused by Whitebeard's vibration or Akainu's attack. The ground was undulating like waves, making it impossible to stand firmly. Many people who were frantically looting were shaken to the ground by the sudden and violent shaking, and the things in their hands were scattered all over the ground. Chapter 22. What's going on? Is the palace going to collapse? Screams of panic rang out one after another. Looking up, the huge dome that originally emitted a soft white light was now flickering violently at an unsettling frequency. The energy lines that covered the dome and walls also became extremely unstable, with the light sometimes bright and sometimes dim. In some places, dazzling electric sparks even erupted, making a harsh crackling sound. The walls, those solid walls made of an unknown one-piece material, now emitted a series of teeth-grinding creaking sounds, as if this huge monster could no longer bear the weight and was about to disintegrate. There were even some tiny cracks appearing on the cold metal ground, and they were expanding at a speed visible to the naked eye. Oh no! This place can't hold on. Marco's face changed drastically. He could clearly feel that a destructive force was coming from the depths of the palace. Is it going to sink to the bottom of the sea again? Marshal Sengoku's face turned extremely ugly. If this huge palace really sank, they would probably be dragged into the abyss and become buried with it. The fear that had been temporarily suppressed because of the treasure hunt, at this moment, surged out again like a flood that broke through the dam, and it was stronger than ever before. The shadow of death hangs over everyone's heart. No one knew what caused the sudden and violent shaking, nor did anyone know what would happen next. They could only watch helplessly as the huge cage that imprisoned them seemed to be heading towards destruction. Quick! Find a way to get out of here. Where's the exit? People began to run around in panic, trying to find a way to leave the collapsing palace. However, this huge circular hall seemed to have no other obvious exits except the small room entrance that Crocodile had discovered before. Just as everyone was falling into despair and panic, the huge round one eye located on the top of the central tower of the palace, which had once forcibly sucked them into the palace, changed again. The dark purple one eye that was as deep as a black hole suddenly lit up without any warning. Different from the previous dark light that swallowed up all light, this time, it emitted a dazzling and violent white light. Not good. Kizaru's face turned really ugly for the first time. From the white light, he felt a terrifying force full of repulsion, which was completely opposite to the previous suction force. The next moment, as everyone was staring in horror, an irresistible repulsive force suddenly erupted from the lit one eye like a volcano. This repulsive force is more violent and direct than the previous suction force. All those who were still inside the palace, no matter if they were marines or pirates, strong or weak, seemed so small and powerless in the face of this sudden and huge repulsive force. Their bodies, along with the various props they had just snatched, Senzu Beans, combat power detectors, universal capsules and some other strange parts whose uses they had no idea, were all grabbed by this unrivaled repulsive force, and then violently hurled out of the palace at a speed even faster than when they were sucked in. Wah-a-a-a-a-a! Help! Screams, exclamations, and the sounds of various objects colliding once again echoed in the palace. But this time, instead of entering the twisted color channel, he was thrown directly into the sky as if shot out by a huge slingshot. Luffy felt an irresistible force coming from behind him, and then his body flew up uncontrollably. He subconsciously hugged the huge execution stake in his arms, as well as some strange fruits that looked like food that he had just looted. Ace was also flung away by the repulsive force. He tried hard to adjust his posture in the air while vigilantly observing the situation around him. Although top warriors like Whitebeard, Sengoku, Garp, etc. were unable to resist this repulsive force, they relied on their strong strength and rich experience to barely maintain their balance and did not tumble wildly in the air like the others. Admirals Akainu, Aokiji, and Kizaru were also somewhat embarrassed by this sudden repulsive force. They tried to resist with their own abilities, but the repulsive force was so strong and sudden that their efforts had little effect. In just a few seconds, all the people who entered the palace were ejected from the palace cleanly and neatly by this powerful repulsive force, just like clearing away garbage. They fell from the sky like flowers scattered from heaven, and returned to the devastated sea above Marineford. Plop! Plop! The sounds of people falling into the water came one after another. Those who couldn't swim began to struggle helplessly the moment they fell into the water, while those who were good at swimming immediately swam towards the floating ice and debris on the sea, trying to find a foothold. Fortunately, before being ejected from the palace, the repulsive force seemed to have provided some cushioning to them, so that they did not suffer much impact damage when falling from a high altitude. After everyone was forced out, the violent shaking of the huge palace suspended in the air gradually subsided. It did not disintegrate or explode immediately as everyone worried, but slowly began to sink towards the rough sea below. Its sinking speed was not fast, but it was unusually firm, as if it had completed some mission and was about to return to the abyss where it originally belonged. Before the palace completely disappeared under the sea, something strange happened again. Suddenly, a dazzling, laser-like lavender beam shot out from a structure at the top of the palace. This beam of light shot straight toward the churning sea surface below. The moment it touched the sea water, it did not disappear, but left a constantly flashing lavender light spot with a diameter of about tens of meters on the sea surface. That spot of light, like a huge lighthouse floating on the sea, emitting a soft and mysterious light, appeared particularly eye-catching against the backdrop of the dim sky and turbid sea water around it. It's like a coordinate marker. A mysterious coordinate that points to a certain direction or marks a special location. Chapter 23. After leaving behind this flickering light, the huge and mysterious palace never stopped for a moment and continued to slowly sink into the deep sea. The sea water slid down its huge surface, making a splashing sound. The mysterious golden words engraved on the surface of the palace seemed to flicker once before sinking into the sea water, and then completely dimmed. Finally, under the gaze of countless complex eyes, the exotic palace that brought endless mysteries and huge shocks completely disappeared into the deep and dark seabed, as if it had never appeared. All that was left was the mysterious light that continued to flicker on the sea, and the Marineford battlefield that had become devastated and in a mess due to war and mutations. The sea breeze blew, bringing with it a hint of salty, wet, and bloody smell. The waves beat against the ice floes and debris, making a monotonous and depressing sound. The whole world seemed to have fallen into an eerie silence because of the appearance and disappearance of the palace. Summit War, this brutal peak showdown that should have determined the direction of the era, was forced to come to an abrupt end because of this sudden change that was beyond everyone's imagination. Marine and pirates, the two forces that were originally fighting to the death, have temporarily lost the mind and energy to continue fighting. The mysterious palace that rose from the bottom of the sea and sank again after performing countless miracles, as well as the props with various magical effects that flowed out of the palace, brought immeasurable impact and shock to both sides. Their minds were completely disturbed by this sudden change. On the Whitebeard pirates' side, although the appearance of Senzu Beans has restored a considerable amount of combat power to Ace and Whitebeard, they are also clearly aware that facing the power of the entire naval headquarters and the endless unknown variables, it is still extremely difficult to completely defeat the Marine, or to retreat unscathed. More importantly, their primary goal, rescuing Ace, had been achieved. Whitebeard looked at the mysterious light flickering on the sea in the distance, then glanced at his sons who were fighting bloody battles and were covered in scars, and a trace of determination appeared on his old face. "Guys!" Whitebeard's voice rang out like a bell, spreading across the entire battlefield, "We retreat." "Dad." Ace looked at Whitebeard unwillingly. He had just recovered his strength and was about to settle accounts with Akainu. "Ace," Whitebeard looked at Ace deeply, with a hint of unquestionable majesty in his voice, "the war is not over yet. But now is not the time to fight." He knew that Marine would not let them go easily. And that mysterious palace and the light spot it left behind would inevitably become the focus of the entire world's attention. They had to leave here as soon as possible, preserve their strength, and plan for the long term. After hearing the captain's order, the members of the Whitebeard pirates were still filled with anger and resentment towards the Marine, but they also understood the current situation. They quickly gathered together to protect Ace and Whitebeard, and at the same time began to collect the palace heritage scattered nearby in the chaos, Senzu Beans, detectors, universal capsules, etc. Like a tide, they began to retreat in an orderly manner towards the port, or in other words, towards the direction where their ships that were scattered by the tsunami were anchored. Marine's side was also in chaos at the moment. Countless Marine soldiers were injured or killed in the previous battle and the palace incident. The naval headquarters building collapsed completely, and the entire Marineford island was shattered. Marshal Sengoku looked livid as he watched the Whitebeard pirates begin to retreat, but he did not immediately order a pursuit. He knew that after this incident, the morale and combat effectiveness of the Marines were greatly affected. More importantly, the mysterious light flashing on the sea and the sunken palace made him even more uneasy and vigilant. He must report the situation here to the world government as soon as possible and organize forces to investigate the mysterious light spot. "All troops, listen up." Marshal Sengoku's voice spread throughout the battlefield through the Den Mushi, "Save the wounded. Count the losses. Keep a close eye on that light spot. No one is allowed to act without my order." The Marine soldiers also felt relieved after hearing the Marshal's order. They were also tired of this bloody fight that seemed to have no end. They began to busy themselves with rescuing their injured companions and cleaning up the battlefield. At the same time, they sent out reconnaissance ships to carefully approach the mysterious light spot, but they did not dare to easily contact it. A summit war that should have been fought with bloodshed and chaos, came to a temporary end in a dramatic way that no one could have predicted. The new focus has shifted from the feud between the Marine and the Whitebeard pirates to the mysterious palace and the unsolved mysteries it left behind. It seems that the world is about to usher in a new, more turbulent and more unpredictable era because of this sudden change. Everything that happened in Marineford spread to all parts of the world at an astonishing speed, as if it had wings. Of course, most of the news has been deliberately filtered and tampered by the Marines and the world government. Ordinary people in most countries may only know about the tragic summit war and the final retreat of the Whitebeard pirates. However, those who truly stand at the top of the world's power and those forces that have well-informed intelligence channels cannot ignore the mysterious palace that descended from the sky, actually rose from the bottom of the sea, and those props with unimaginable technology. The news quickly reached the Holy Land of Marijois and the ears of the Five Elders, the highest power center of the world government. 5 elderly men in black suits and serious expressions were gathered in a heavily guarded secret room. In front of them was an emergency report with the highest level of encryption that had just been sent from Marineford. The report described in detail the appearance and disappearance of the mysterious palace, as well as the characteristics of various magical props that flowed out of the palace, including magic beans that can bring the dead back to life, instruments that can detect combat power, and universal capsules that can compress space. After reading the report, the expressions on the faces of the 5 elders became extremely solemn. It could even be said that they were filled with a hint of shock and uneasiness that was difficult to conceal. They are the controllers behind this world and think they know everything about it, whether it is the truth of history, the secrets of ancient weapons, or the origin of devil fruit, they all know more or less. Chapter 24. However, everything described in this report was completely beyond their understanding. A mysterious palace with technology far beyond the level of this era suddenly appeared in Marineford, and some props with almost miraculous effects leaked out. This made them feel a chill from the bottom of their hearts. What on earth is this? A 5 elders with a mustache asked in a hoarse voice, his eyes full of confusion and fear. The report mentioned that there are some spherical decorations on the surface of the palace that are similar to Dragon Ball. Another 5 elders who wore glasses and looked more gentle pushed the frame on his nose and murmured. Moreover, the effects of the items flowing out of the palace are magical, just like the legendary Dragon Ball that can fulfill any wish. A burly 5 elders with a scar on his forehead said in a low voice. Could it be, that this is related to some lost ancient civilization? This possibility cannot be ruled out. But even the ancient civilizations we know about did not have the technological level to reach this level. The 5 elders fell into heated discussions and speculations. They racked their brains but could not connect this mysterious palace that suddenly appeared with any of the intelligence they had. Finally, one of the 5 elders who looked to be of the highest status and had a long white beard slammed the table, interrupting the discussion. No matter where it comes from, no matter what its purpose is, the bearded 5 elders said in a cold and decisive voice, the existence of this Dragon Ball Palace, this is the name they temporarily gave to this mysterious palace based on the spherical decorations similar to Dragon Balls on the palace and the characteristics of the props that flowed out, and the props of advanced technology that flowed out of it must not be known to the world. There was a sharp light flashing in his eyes, this kind of power that is enough to subvert the world order, if it falls into the hands of people with bad intentions, the consequences will be disastrous. More importantly, it may shake the foundation of our world government's rule. Upon hearing this, the other 4-5 elders all nodded in agreement. They knew very well that once this unimaginable technology was widely spread or mastered by some powerful forces, the existing world situation would inevitably undergo earth-shaking changes. And this kind of change was something they absolutely did not want to see. Issue the highest order immediately. The bearded 5 elders said sternly, classify the Dragon Ball Palace and all related information as top secret. Strictly block the news, and prohibit any form of dissemination and discussion. All Marines who participated in the Summit War and came into contact with this information must be strictly examined and thought-controlled. Anyone who leaks the information will be killed without mercy. At the same time, he paused, a trace of greed and determination flashing in his eyes. The most elite forces of the secret organization will conduct an in-depth investigation and exploration of the coordinates of the mysterious light spot in Marineford. Be sure to find out the origin of the palace, and recycle as many advanced technologies and props as possible. If possible. The bearded 5 elders lowered his voice even lower, with a frightening light flashing in his eyes, we must firmly grasp this power in the hands of the world government. Top secret instructions were sent out from the Holy Land of Marijois and quickly reached the various intelligence and operations departments of the world government. A secret operation surrounding the Dragon Ball Palace is about to unfold in secret. And because of the emergence of this mysterious palace and the outflow of those magical props, this world has quietly set off a more turbulent and unpredictable undercurrent. No one knows what kind of future awaits them, but one thing is certain, this era is destined to never be peaceful again. The sea breeze of Marineford still carries the aftertaste of gunpowder and blood, blowing over this devastated land. The former symbol of Marine's glory is now only a pile of broken walls and countless debris floating on the sea. In the middle of this chaotic sea, the constantly flickering lavender light left by the mysterious palace is like a huge question mark, attracting everyone's attention and affecting everyone's mind. Marine Marshal Sengoku was standing on the deck of a makeshift command ship. Under his iconic seagull hat was a face full of fatigue and worry. His eyes sometimes looked at the retreating Whitebeard pirate's ship in the distance, and sometimes stared at the mysterious light spot on the sea. His brows were tightly locked together, as if they could pinch a fly to death. His heart was filled with an unprecedented heaviness. The Summit War, a war that he carefully planned, in which he put all of his Marines' efforts and even sacrificed countless lives, should have ended with the complete annihilation of the Whitebeard pirates, the execution of Fire Fist Ace, and thus shocking the entire Great Pirates era. However, plans cannot keep up with changes. First, Luffy, the Straw Hat Kid, unexpectedly broke in and disrupted his deployment. Then, the mysterious palace that descended from the sky, actually rose from the bottom of the sea, and those gods' tools with incredible effects completely disrupted the rhythm of the entire war, and it can even be said that the war was forcibly stopped. Although Whitebeard was badly wounded, he seemed to have recovered some of his strength thanks to the appearance of the Senzu Beans. Ace was even more miraculously resurrected and his strength seemed to have improved. Although the Whitebeard pirates suffered heavy losses, their core combat power remained, and with the help of those mysterious items, their threat was even more difficult to estimate than before. Although the Marines also received some props from the palace, they also suffered heavy losses and their morale was greatly hit. More importantly, the advanced technology displayed by the mysterious palace and the pink demon in the image that could easily destroy the planet cast an indelible shadow on the hearts of all the Marines. Marshal Sengoku has a strong feeling that the era of Whitebeard may really be coming to an end. This world's strongest man who once dominated the sea could not withstand the erosion of time and the tide of the times. However, a more chaotic, unpredictable, and dangerous era seems to have arrived ahead of time because of the emergence of this mysterious palace. If those magic beans with magical effects are abused, they will completely change the pattern of war, making death less scary and making battles more cruel and lasting. Although instruments that can detect combat effectiveness can allow people to understand the power gap more intuitively, they may also cause greater panic and despair, and may even give rise to some extremists who only pursue numbers. Chapter 25. The potential of those universal capsules that can create all kinds of creations out of thin air is even more immeasurable. If they are used in the military, what kind of terrifying weapons will be born? If they are used in business, what kind of huge impact will it have on the existing economic system? Not to mention, the palace itself and the pink demon that can destroy the planet, the unknown power represented by them is like a sword of Damocles hanging over the head of the entire world, which may fall at any time and bring about a devastating disaster. The more Marshal Sengoku thought about it, the more frightened he felt, and the more powerless he felt. He felt like a praying mantis standing in front of a train that was out of control. No matter how hard he tried, he could not stop the train from rushing into the unknown abyss. He had spent his entire life in the military, working for marine justice and world peace. He thought he had done well enough and worked hard enough. However, facing the situation that was completely beyond his control, he felt a deep sense of powerlessness and frustration for the first time. He was tired, really tired. It's not just physical fatigue, but also mental fatigue. He looked at the chaotic sea and the mysterious flickering light, and suddenly a strong idea emerged in his mind, to resign from the position of Marine Marshal. He is no longer able to control this out-of-control situation. Perhaps it is time for someone younger, more energetic, and more adaptable to this new era to take over his position. As for himself, maybe he could retreat to the second line like that old guy Garp, train some new people, or simply retire and have a few days of leisure. Once this idea came into his mind, it began to grow wildly in his mind like bamboo shoots after rain. Marshal Sengoku sighed deeply, his eyes filled with mixed emotions. He knew that once this decision was made, it would have a profound impact on the entire marine and even the entire world. However, he had no other choice. The shadow of the new era has quietly descended, and it seems that it is time for him, the guardian of the old era, to bow out. Just when Marshal Sengoku was considering retreating because of the chaos in front of him and the unknown future, on the other side of the battlefield, a soul full of evil and greed fell into unprecedented ecstasy because of these sudden changes. Blackbeard Marshal D. Teach, one of the biggest troublemakers and beneficiaries of the Summit War, was hiding in the cabin of a stolen marine warship with his group of vicious companions who were just recruited from the underwater prison Impel Down, his face filled with irrepressible excitement and pride. During the crazy search inside the palace just now, Blackbeard also grabbed some good trophies with his cunning mind and unscrupulous style of doing things. In his hands, he was playing with several combat power detectors. In his opinion, these single-lens instruments were simply artifacts tailor-made for him. He couldn't wait to put a detector on his right eye and then turned his gaze on himself. The lens immediately showed a string of golden numbers that made him very happy. This number was many times higher than when he was a small fry on Whitebeard's ship. Thief ha 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 ha, thief ha 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 ha. Blackbeard let out a triumphant and arrogant laugh, his fat body trembling slightly with excitement. He knew that the surge in this value was not only because he obtained the dark fruit, but also because he had just successfully seized Whitebeard's powerful shock fruit ability. Although the process was a bit dangerous and embarrassing, the result was gratifying. Dark fruit, can devour everything and deprive others of their devil fruit abilities. Shock fruit has the power to destroy the world. These two completely different, yet both extremely powerful devil fruit abilities, are now perfectly integrated into his body. He could clearly feel an unprecedented, surging force flowing through his limbs. He even had an illusion that if he wanted to, he could easily cause earthquakes and tsunamis like Whitebeard and turn the whole world upside down. The ever-increasing value displayed on the combat power detector, which represented his strength, gave him the most intuitive and convincing confirmation of his powerful feeling. Great! This is really great! Blackbeard licked his lips greedily, his eyes filled with infinite desire for power. In addition to the combat power detector, he also grabbed a device similar to a treatment instrument that looked a little damaged but still seemed to be usable. Although he didn't know the specific usage of this thing, the things that flowed out of the palace must not be ordinary items. What makes him even more excited is that he is salivating over the potential of those so-called Dragon Ball gadgets, Senzu Beans and magic capsules. The magic beans that can bring people back to life and instantly restore them to their peak state. Heaven-defying technology that can compress huge objects into tiny capsules. If he could master these things and use them on a large scale, then his ambition to dominate the world would no longer be an unattainable dream. Ha 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 ha. This era belongs to me. Blackbeard laughed even more wildly, his eyes flashing with green light like a hungry wolf. He immediately gave the order and led his equally excited men to quickly evacuate the chaotic sea area. He had gotten what he wanted, even more than he expected. Now, he needed to find a safe place to digest this harvest and start his new, bigger, and more evil conspiracy. The era of Whitebeard is coming to an end, and he, Blackbeard Marshal Teach, will play a more important role on the stage of this new era. He wants to make the whole world tremble under his dark rule. The smoke of the Summit War has not yet completely dissipated, and a new storm is already brewing. Different from Blackbeard's ecstasy full of conspiracy and greed, the experience of Straw Hat Crew is more like an adventure full of thrills and adventures. Luffy, the thick-skinned captain, had experienced a life-and-death battle and witnessed Ace being severely injured. However, after Ace miraculously recovered, his attention was quickly attracted to the magical palace and the various novelties that flowed out of the palace. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel so you are notified of future uploads. You can find the next parts in the playlist visible on the screen or on my channel. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.